Call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Education of Community Unit School District 201 being held today, Tuesday, February 23rd, 2010. Roll call, please.
Ms. Casey? Here. Mr. Charleston?
Here.
Mrs. Charlton?
Here.
Ms. Kelly? Here. Mrs. Lubeck?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here. Could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item on tonight is the student recognition. Come on up together.
We're proud to present for the geography winners for Miller and Manning School. All of our 4th grade and 5th grade students at Miller School participated in the geography bee. So I'm proud to announce that Sam Asa is this year's winner, and congratulations, Sam.
Congratulations. And my name is Diana Mulvey. I'm the principal of Manning Elementary School, and with me is Ryan Pleva, and we also give the geography, we have a geography bee contest for 4th and 5th graders, and Ryan is a 4th grader, and his proud parents are Wendy and Paul Pleva, and I'd like to say congratulations to our winner for the whole school. Thank you very much. Here you go.
At this time, I'd like to recognize all the students and staff and parents who were involved with this year's Snowflake Retreat. Snowflake Retreat, along with Snowball and Snow Flurry, are retreats where the district staff and parents and students come together to address social behavior, emotional issues with our students. And it is our desire to continue this program, and hopefully we're to help students address any problems and really support the leadership of our young people. At this time, there are two staff members I would like to get up here right away, and that's Julie Johnson and Colleen Klein. Are they here right now? Why don't you come over here first? These two ladies were instrumental and really tirelessly work to coordinate all this, and believe me, to get all the people and students together and get this product ready to go to camp, everybody back safe and sound, is quite an undertaking, and we appreciate that. Now, I can call off the names, or you can call off the names. What would you like me to do?
I'll call off the names.
There you go. At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Julie, and she will call off the recipients.
Okay. Doesn't matter who I start with.
You can start with whoever you like.
Okay. We'll go ahead and we'll start with the adults. Can I say something too?
You can
okay.
Sure.
Really, Colleen and I did not put this whole program together ourselves. We could not do it without the adult staff and the teen staff and the high school staff. This program turned out fantastic this year, and it's something that Colleen and I both look forward to every single year, but without the 10 adults that went with us and without the 26 students who I'm about to call, this program wouldn't be as successful as it is. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with the adult staff. Lisa Kozin. Colleen Walsh. Jason Prisney. Jason Bolden. Michelle Schlicker. Sergeant Jim Schlicker. Detective Craig Grumorzak, who is not here tonight. And then Jessica Vervac. I think that's his name. Andy Doyle. And Amy Quattrone. Would you like them to stay? Thank you. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and recognize our high school staff. First off, Megan Larum. Ryan Schlicker. Emily Head. Megan Surratt. Jake Spitalny. Nick Strobel. Claire Connolly. Jesse Svedich. Maureen Bailey. And Aubrey Benson. You guys, we'll let you stay up there. How about that? Next, our junior high student staff. First off is Kayla Ryan. Brett Sybil. Ashley Lawrence. Carly Santor. Scott Larum. Alana Pace. Elena Vanderkar. Shannon Flynn. Missy Frogeau. Victoria Thomas. Audrey Proctor. Austin Schlicker. Carly Griffin. Katie Charlton. And Morgan Goliath. You want to say anything?
Is this, do you want a better picture? Okay, okay.
Okay. And one more announcement is you will all receive certificates. They'll be coming to you guys shortly. So why don't you guys go ahead and get together so we can go ahead and take a picture. And I think we're in this one.
Good. You guys stay back here.
Thank you all very much giving your time, and it's a great moment for District 201 with everyone here. Thank you all. Please stay if you want to, but this might be a time you'd want to leave. Unless, stay around. All right, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the January 26, 2010 regular meeting of the Board of Education. I'm sorry, are there any comments about that? Those minutes? Any questions? Okay. Then the chair will entertain a motion.
Linda.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? And the next one is in your folder. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the January 26, 2010 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the February 11th, 2010 special meeting of the Board of Education, which is in your burgundy folders or binders.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The next one's in your orange folder. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the February 11th, 2010 special meeting of the Board of Education.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I abstain.
All opposed? Again, in your orange folder, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the February 18th, 2010 special meeting of the Board of Education.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain again.
All opposed? And the last one, also in your orange folder, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the February 18th, 2010 special meeting of the Board of Education.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The next item on the agenda is the public comments. I have one card here in front of me. Mr. Jim Sullivan, please.
Good evening. I was here a month ago, and we asked that the board consider looking at the Manning Playground as it relates to the ADA requirements, and just wanted to tonight follow up on that and sort of give you guys an update on where we are with that. This week we had a chance to meet with a small meeting with Mrs. Mulby and Mike Mayoris, Kevin Driscoll from New Toys, two representatives from the PTO, and also Bob Fleck, who is in the Westmont Park District and also a Manning parent. And what I wanted to report to the board tonight is that upon looking at the playground, it appears that the playground is close to meeting current ADA requirements. Current playground sort of looks as such. We have 0 play structure components that are accessible via a ramp. 3 are required. We have 3 play structure components that are accessible via transfer. 3 are required. We have 2 ground level events, 4 are required. And we have 2 ground level types, is what they call it. This is information we get from New Toys, and 3 are required. So we're close. So there are basically 4 areas of concern that we talked about in our meeting. And again, the idea of what we're trying to do is try and be proactive about this instead of reactive. As you may know, Manning does have a child who is in the early childhood program right now who will be going to kindergarten next year. So what we found out is 4 things. Number 1, we deal with the equipment. New Toys, who is the manufacturer of the current playground equipment, feels that they can actually do some renovating to the current equipment, add some additional components and maybe change out some components that will meet the ADA requirements. The type of equipment that was put in 1995, New Toys still uses. So it's possible that some of the equipment can be retrofitted or remodeled or renovated to sort of pick up some of the deficiencies that we have. The second area that we looked at was the flooring. There's a couple different floor surfaces that are out there right now. There's a current rubber, what they call poured-in-place flooring. And some of the issues that we have with the flooring right now, as you may or may not be aware of, is the floor seems to be delaminating, for lack of better words. There are sections of it that are completely missing. It also seems to be shrinking over the years. And what's happening is there are gaps that are being created from this rubber shrinking. And what's happening is that bees and wasps and other kind of insects are finding their way into these areas around the playground where the kids are playing, obviously, and forming homes. There was a section of the school time there was a section of the school year this year by where they actually had to quarantine off the playground area because there was a bad problem with bees and wasps, and several kids were getting stung, and so they felt the best thing to do was close it down until they could deal with that situation. And then once it was dealt with, they were able to reopen. What we're looking at right now is we're looking at the possibilities of maybe resurfacing that area. They talked about that there's a half-inch layer of rubber, which is sort of the final finished product on it, and there was some talk about whether or not that initial half-inch layer could be scraped off and possibly redone. So we're looking into some options that way. The third area that we looked at was the playground mulch. The playground mulch that's in there now is a recycled rubber tires, basically, is what's there. It seems to be an ongoing maintenance problem from basically the rubber disappearing, rubber going home in kids' pockets, kids' backpacks, wherever. But over the years, it seems to be an ongoing maintenance thing. Now, I know the school has put some time in every year to try and rake that mulch back into around the playground, which is where it's needed. But over the years, it seems to be disappearing. In doing some research, we found out that what we need around the playground equipment is around 12 inches of mulch or fall protection, if you will. And what we currently have is about 2 inches. So what we're doing right now with that is we're sort of looking at our possibilities of resurfacing that area. The rubber mulch seems to cause several problems. Part of it's disposal, part of it's just logistics and what can be put over it and these kinds of things. So we're working with New Toys, and also Mike is also helping us in looking at some products that possibly we could put over that or some sort of resurfacing. So another area we're looking at. And the fourth area that we're looking at is the ramp, or berm, as it's also been referred to. The current ramp does not meet the ADA requirements. So when I started out and I talked to you about play structures that are accessible via the ramp, Because the ramp is not at such an incline that meets ADA requirements, it means we basically have zero components of the existing play set that any student can get to who may be in a wheelchair or such. So we're also looking at ways that we can rework or regrade or redo that ramp so that it also can meet current ADA requirements. So in closing, where we left it with is we're meeting again in 2 weeks with New Toys and the same small group. New Toys was going to do an assessment of what was out there, take a look at what sort of needs to be remodeled and renovated, make some recommendations to us, and get back to us in our meeting in 2 weeks. So at that time also, hopefully we'll be able to discuss some resurfacing options. So I just wanted to give you guys an update on where we are with that, and then hopefully in 2 weeks come again and update you folks again. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on that. Are there any other public comments at this time? The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. I've been asked to pull out number 6. Are there any other things to pull out? No? Are there any questions on anything in there? Discussion? No?
Let me just give you a lowdown
yeah.
of what happened today. I got some renewed rates from Dearborn Life, they're called now. Currently, we have both coverages, life and long-term disability with Dearborn. They came back to us with an increased rate on the long-term disability, so I was suggesting that we move over to Reliance Standard. As of about 3 o'clock today, we got some updated rates, and they'd like to keep our business, so they're pretty much going to match the rates that we're getting with Reliance. So my recommendation would be now to stay with Dearborn Life for both the long-term disability and the life.
And that changes from what's in our binders.
Yeah, what's in the
right?
binder says we would go over to Reliance for the long-term disability.
Any
So
questions?
Dearborn matched or Dearborn beat?
They matched, pretty much. I think it's a $15 difference. You'll see that the rates that are in front of you on that new sheet don't match item for item, but the total of the two together match.
Okay.
So it's a savings of about $5,385 over what's currently in the projections. So when we talk about budget cuts later on, there's $5,385 we can take out of the picture.
Yeah.
So can we approve the consent agenda with that particular item modified then?
Right.
Okay.
As amended.
The chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda with the amendment on number 6.
So moved.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Ms. Kelly?
Yes.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
The next item is the superintendent's report.
Suggest that you move first to the library program
Yes,
report so
okay.
they don't have to stay the whole time.
We are going to change that.
If I may, just a 2-second congratulations to the, one of the items we approved was the additional equipment in Miller. The PTO at Miller was successful in raising all of the funds necessary to cover those additional equipment pieces. And so congratulations to the Miller folks. That was it.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, now we will move to the annual report on the library programs. Ms. Houle?
Good evening. It's time for our annual report on our district media centers. A report is a requirement of our grant application to the Illinois State Library for the school district library media grant. Grant eligibility requires regional library system membership, an organized collection of library materials, and a program run by a librarian. The grant, funded by the Live and Learn initiative, requires the annual review of our media centers and how they're progressing in meeting the standards in the Linking for Learning from Illinois School Library Media Association. While I presented my first formal report back in October of 2000 for the FY 2001 grant, we've actually received funding since 1995 when I sent in my first district application. And to date, we've received $19,484.44 through this grant. This includes this year's funding of about $1,185 we received notice of yesterday. Now, in my last time presenting to you, I'm excited about what is happening in our media centers and what we are accomplishing as a group of professionally certified school library media specialists and your building technology facilitators. Linking for Learning states that the three roles of the Library Media Center are program administration, information access, and learning and teaching. Tonight, I want to focus on learning and teaching, which has the essential components of: the library media program is integral to the educational program of the school, models and promotes collaborative planning, promotes reading, listening, and communicating, integrates technology for learning and teaching, supports learning of the entire learning community, provides an inviting and accessible place, and information literacy skills are integral to the collection. To meet these components, we look to not just one set of standards, but standards from a range of professional sources: Linking for Learning, the American Association of School Librarians 21st Century Standards, ISTE's National Education Technology Standards, and of course, our state standards. This year, ISMA has endorsed a new curricular resource, ISAL, or Illinois Standards Aligned Instruction for Libraries. These align these three resources into one, and it's in the form of an online collaborative wiki. It is endorsed by the Association of College and University and Research Libraries, who also provide their standards, thereby providing a K through higher education curriculum. As we develop our K-12 medium curriculum, it can only be helpful in coordinating our efforts. A strong information literacy program does not start at junior high. It develops from kindergarten up, spiraling just as we spiral all our curricular areas, as information literacy has no boundaries. It involves library media specialists collaborating with their teaching colleagues to create opportunities for students to find, evaluate, and use information. While teachers are developing reading strategies and skills with our students, we must, of necessity, prepare them for the future by stepping away from workbooks, tests, texts, novels, etc., to apply these strategies to information in a variety of sources. We cannot benefit our students without providing research opportunities to learn to use a variety of resources while becoming ethical users of information and developing critical thinking skills that are expected to be well developed once they complete their K-12 education. It has also been shown that a strong school library media program improves student achievement with better performance on assessments of reading, comprehension, and basic research skills, as well as fostering a love of reading and desire for lifelong learning. This year, in preparing my report, it was probably the most difficult because there's just so much going on. I asked my colleagues, Mrs. Johnson, Ms. Burgandy, and Ms. Therese, if they could provide me with information on what they were doing, taking into consideration that which is in the ISAL. Attempting to share is impossible, everything that they do, but I'll do my best to summarize. First of all, though, integral to the learning teaching component is our collections. With the addition of automation this year to our elementary collection and the updating of our junior high and high school to the new system, our collections are now on the web 24/7. The ability to use automated catalogs enhances student skills for all searchable resources. With our Media Center web pages and catalogs available on the web, we provide access to our programs beyond the four walls of our libraries, opening up additional learning opportunities to all our students and their parents. Our media programs are integral to our building educational programs. Mrs. Johnson and Ms. Burgandy are developing their curriculums as they meet with their students twice a week. They focus on information literacy skills, love of reading, and making curriculum connections between the media center and the classroom. Students from kindergarten up are learning to use a variety of resources for many really cool, wonderful activities. They are introduced to skills that before were not addressed till junior high, learning the basics of using print resources, encyclopedias, internet sources, and databases. They're using the big three and the big six to problem solve their work, a fantastic tool when navigating the waters of research. With basic research skills introduced early, students develop better habits along with valuing using a variety of resources for informational and recreational pursuits. Mrs. Johnson and Ms. Burgandy are collaborating with teachers to connect Media Center resources to what's happening in the classroom, often not done before. With this collaborative approach and linking of library, classroom, and curricular topics, my colleagues are able to assist students of all abilities, learning styles, and needs. There is no longer a separation of the library and the Media Center. It's a team effort to benefit our students. Most exciting is the escalating excitement of the joy of reading. Students are learning to appreciate literature through reading and listening activities, as well as exposure to award-winning books, opportunities to participate in book clubs, and, of course, enjoy the experience of book fairs. At the junior high, over the past 17 years, I've developed a curriculum based on Goal 5 of the state standards, collaborating with my language arts colleagues in developing 3 unique 6 to 12-week long projects, one at each grade level, as well as collaborating on quest projects. For our 6th grade research paper, I've introduced a variety of resources available, including general nonfiction, reference materials, print and online encyclopedias, databases, and web resources. Up till now, by junior high, most students have not learned about a variety of resources, and they would be all too willing to leave the research in the Google box or in the amateur-created Wikipedia, making little effort to evaluate their resources when they have little knowledge of the topics they're researching. With basic information literacy skills introduced in 6th grade, I can assure my colleagues in all departments that students can use a variety of sources, work searching with good keywords and subjects, and that they know how to cite their sources in formal bibliographies. As you've read in my last 3 newsletters, there's a variety of projects happening at the junior high, not only in language arts, but in math, science, and social studies. This year, through collaboration with the Westmont Public Library, I have had the delightful opportunity to introduce their databases to our students. And our students have benefited for our 7th grade biography project, for our literary criticism project in Quest, and for our 8th grade contemporary issue project, and now, beginning today, our 8th grade decades project. Databases in particular are an important tool students must know and use extensively. Now, I have to admit, trying to maintain reading interest at the junior high when their life is so busy and there are so many distractions is very difficult, and it is a challenge, but we provide many opportunities for book selection. We have a large collection of books that the public library cannot match, which is totally a junior high collection. And every year, my book fair has been a success with student excitement for reading opportunities, a pleasure to observe. With the introduction of information literacy skills at the elementary level, the junior high curriculum in the future will be focusing on preparing our students to efficiently and effectively use resources for many pursuits. Whereas in the past we introduced and the high school further developed skills, today our Westmont High School students are expected to take the skills they've learned and fine-tune K through 12, or 8, excuse me, and be ready to use them in authentic learning contexts at the high school. Search and retrieval skills are reinforced, but students are expected to know how to use information and use information as ethical users. They must use information to form new knowledge using technology as a tool. The curriculum at the high school includes developing skills of planning, organizing, critical thinking, collaborating, writing, and researching in the context of subjects they are learning. Mrs. Therese collaborates with Mrs. Mahmood, and the 9th grade students have been engaged in 2 technology-based projects, digital storytelling and a problem-based learning with information shared in a wiki. She is working with health and science teachers, and she is beginning developing a sophomore English projects for next year to continue the spiraling and creating of more sophisticated products to prepare our students for their future. Technology integration and skill building begins at an early age, where students learn how technology can enhance their learning. At the elementary level, students use PowerPoint, Word, PhotoStory, Kidspiration, KidPix, etc. to create multimedia projects. These skill-building opportunities are will be greatly appreciated at the junior high when time to introduce extensive software instruction is often difficult, as we want to focus on the project. We offer a great variety of technology opportunities to let our junior high students shine. By 8th grade, when we introduce the Decades Wiki, we enjoy the opportunity for our students' imaginations to fly and how to use what they know to create a quality product. We can only imagine how good our students are yet to become. It will follow that by high school, our students will be ready to achieve success at integrating their research and new knowledge in projects that will prepare them for higher education and the world of work. One final note in technology. As you know, internet safety education is now a mandate from the state of Illinois for grades 3 through 12. We as a group have developed programs in which to provide our students with important information that they need to be safe on the web, using the internet's many opportunities to also enhance their learning and life. Each building has its own tools and resources, and we selected tools to meet our students' needs, including CyberSmart, NetSmarts, and Attorney General Lisa Madigan's resources with both speakers and publications. Ongoing development will be required as we continue to determine and meet the needs of our digital generation. Our challenge now is to move forward in developing an official K-12 curriculum that prepares our students for 21st century learning, provides resources to meet the needs of all students and staff, integrates technology throughout the program, its program and school curriculum, and where information literacy skills are integral to all content areas and objectives. With ISEL standards in mind, students will leave District 201 capable of using skills to find and use information effectively and efficiently, evaluate it critically and competently, and be able to creatively and ethically present their new knowledge in a variety of formats. The question is, can we prepare our students for life after District 201 to equally compete with students who are leaving high school across our state to go to junior college, trade schools, colleges, and university? The information literacy and digital skills our students need can be met through the collaboration and development of activities, opportunities, projects, and experiences to challenge our students. As your library media specialists, we've taken on the task, and where once I would have said we're basic with some proficiency, I can now say we're proficient and excited to head for exemplary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? If anybody's interested, I have a copy that I'd be more than glad to send your way.
Linda, I just want to thank you for your dedication to our library media centers in the district. You know, I've been listening to your report every year for the last several years, and I do remember specifically several years ago you talking about how we are nowhere near proficiency and outlining for us what we needed to get there. And I think you've educated us as a board and helped us hopefully make decisions to support your recommendations, and I'm so pleased to hear your report tonight. Thanks for everything.
Thank you. The next item is the superintendent's report.
Take a look there. There's some information from the federal government about 2 weeks ago, I guess last Friday. Christy Civic and I joined about 20 some other people from DuPage County, go down and meet with one of the assistant secretaries of education and some of their staff to talk about some of the issues that we see as the federal government gets ready to reauthorize the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act. One of the things that is clear from that conversation is that adequate yearly progress, or AYP, which is a concern for many districts, will be eliminated within the new scope of the law, that they would really like to move to a growth model. The big concern there is that at this time they don't have assessments in place to really move to that growth model. So one of the things that's in some of their federal stimulus dollars right now for education are funds to try to develop those assessments. So the other piece there that I think bears stating is the concept that right now 47 states in the District of Columbia are working on a set of common core standards as far as what are the high school expectations for students so that they could go into college directly and earn credit in either a math or a reading course. And so that process is coming forward. The federal government's been very clear that these are not their attempt at national standards, but that 47 states happen to get together and decide to do something, the federal government will be supportive. The next piece there is cost containment. Attached is various different items that talk about some of the potential options to make budget reductions for next year. I want to be very clear that the list of suggested cuts that are in your packet or in the public packet are by no means recommendations from the staff. They are simply all of the possible suggestions which people have made. When the staff comes back and gives you recommendations, some of those may not be on there. There may be other things that are not on that list that will come back as recommendations. The other information is there's some information there from 1986 and 85, the last time the district put together a referendum, and these are the cuts they made. And I think it's important to note that some of those cuts that were made in 1986 have never returned to the district. So some of the programs that were cut at that time have just simply never been replaced. The high school newspaper is one item that just comes to mind. There's also, tied to that, a brief survey from Lend that shows, at this point at least, basically a little over 80% of the school districts are planning some level of staff reductions for the next school year. So, and I don't know if you saw the Tribune this morning, but again, there was, clearly this is not an issue for 201. This is an issue for the entire state. I think the schools in 204 have on their bulletin boards the amount of money the state owes them right now. In talking to the Lend staff, and we'll talk about more of this when PMA speaks about 5-year projections, the common wisdom is still that there is a good chance that general state aid will have there'll be some sort of impact on general state aid. The federal government stimulus money, in some respects, limit the exposure of general state aid because it can't go below basically the 2007 appropriation. But basically they think that they can still accommodate that if they leave the poverty grant alone and if they cut all of the flat grant district funds and the alternative formula district funds, which we're one of those alternative district formulas. And you'll see on our PMA projections, we're articulating one model that would show the loss of that general state aid. So I think if there are any specific questions, they probably could wait until after the PMA people have done their presentation. There's also information there on the MAP assessment results from the winter iteration of that test. In a summary of some of the curriculum accomplishments that have been made over the past year that Ms. Civic put together, particularly for the recent regional office compliance visit. So I don't know if you have any questions about any of those curriculum items before I move on to the compliance visit.
No, Steve, I did have a question, though, on the document that you provided us with the 1986 information on those cuts that were made back then.
Right.
Before
I wasn't
the
here at the
referendum.
time, so I'm not sure if I can answer the question.
But I'm just wondering, that almost looks like an informational piece.
This was informational. This is went out in what their projected cuts were going to be. They made 1 year of cuts, I believe, and I think this is the 1986 document that shows what their additional cuts will be.
So was that shared with the community, do you know?
What's that?
Was that ever shared with the community?
Oh, yes. This went out to the community in either 85 or 86. It doesn't have, the folders lump both of those together and don't give, most of these documents, as you can tell, are not dated, so.
Thank you.
Frame of reference, yeah, and I think it's worth noting, in 1986, at the time, the district had an accumulated debt of $1 million, and in 1985 was forced to cut $669,000 out of the annual operating budget. $669,000 in 1986 dollars is a whole lot different than $2010. So it's probably twice the size, 3 times the size maybe. So it just depends, but that was, and I'm looking at least one gentleman who was here during that time. That was clearly a very difficult time. And obviously, we're in times that are, it's not as difficult as, desperate just yet, but we're talking about it. We're talking about the situation now because it could get there very quickly if we don't address things quickly. So.
You also have, besides the narrative from me, you have a copy of the compliance report from the ROE. Generally, they were very complimentary about the district. There were 2 specific items that I think they were a little unhappy with, mostly because they were items that had been pointed out in the compliance visit 5 years ago, and the superintendent at the time had actually articulated that those issues had been completed in the spring of 2005, but in those cases that hadn't been. And in fact, one of those items had been addressed to some extent through the strategic planning process, and the other item had been addressed as we renovated the teacher and staff handbooks a couple years ago. But in that particular case, the ROE still would like some changes to those handbooks as far as what is articulated there.
Steve, you mentioned that the survey for item 6 could be completed this spring or incorporated into the strategic planning process.
Yes.
Did you made a decision, or are you looking for direction?
I would look for direction from the board for that.
For me, I would say do it.
Can you state it again, Dan?
Okay. In the 3rd paragraph in the ROE thing, there's a section on a survey that needs to be completed from 2005 that apparently wasn't completed. And the option is to do the survey presently or incorporate it into the strategic planning process. But given that we've deferred the strategic planning process until later this summer and some of the other stuff that's, that we're going to be continuing to work on, I would just suggest addressing the compliance issue and doing the survey presently.
What would be involved with that survey?
Basically, it's a survey for student service, needs. And in fact, it was incorporated in the strategic plan survey, last time as far as, special ed, psychologist, guidance counselor needs. Mm-hmm. Really, the ROE was really more upset, I think, that they had been told it had been done in the spring of 2005, and it actually hadn't been. And so we could either do it as a standalone survey in the spring, or we could wait and do it as part of the strategic planning process in the fall. It's really up to the board what they want us to do.
Well, I'm not clear as to what exactly is involved in conducting
the state code requires that there be some sort of survey of staff and parents about their access and, the effectiveness of psychological, social work, counseling, and special ed services, and I think nursing services. There are 5 items that are articulated.
Okay, so we have to send out
a
paper survey or
we could do it
survey
via the
monkey
web.
or
We could use it.
whatever.
We could do it via SurveyMonkey very simply.
Okay, yeah, then I think we should do it.
I agree.
I think we should do, could we do it before we start the strategic planning, because then we would have it?
That's what Dan just asked.
That was the
Just
question. You want us to
suggested
do it now before the strategic plan, or do
Yeah.
you want us to do it as part of the strategic plan?
That's
Yes,
what I'm
now.
saying. I'm saying now.
Now.
Now,
Sure.
yeah,
Okay.
great.
Do a second question or not?
I'm sorry.
No?
The
All
second
right.
question? Oh, here.
And then potential facilities projects. There's some estimates, and they are very rough estimates from architects for potential projects that are tied specifically to the Capital Development Board funds that we are anticipating, or at least that have been promised to us since 2002. If we would obtain those funds, work on elevators at the elementary school to make those buildings entirely ADA compliant would clearly be within the scope of that funds. And so that's those are what we got estimates on, along with obviously potentially enclosing some of the classrooms at the high school. So,
And there still isn't an estimate as far as what that would cost.
correct. There isn't a cost estimate for that at this point.
In here, you mentioned the funding would also require some level of working cash bonding. Would that be something in addition to the bonds we already sold? And
Yes.
have?
Those would be new bonds, because the bonds that exist have already been identified for specific projects.
Do we have any idea, this is a million-dollar question, are we ever going to see this money? Do we know?
We don't know.
Do we
We've
have
been
any?
The anticipation is that as the state was going to float new bonds, that this $27 million or whatever would be included within the scope of those bonds. That's what the governor's office has told us. And so, at least working with our state representative and state senator, they continue to put pressure on the governor to put this money forward. So we'll see if it appears. I don't really know.
And you had made it mention about that having the elevators for Manning and Miller would fall under the requirements for this. What other items would fall under that?
The money was originally promised to us in the scope of doing basically compliance work for ADA compliance at Manning and South. That was the vast majority of the work. Some of that work has already been done. Some of that work no longer is required to be done. The question becomes how flexible the state will be on giving us the money. It appears that the current thought is they will be fairly flexible with the money because they obviously promised it to us 7 years ago.
Can we get a list of other things in the district that we could potentially use this for?
We won't know that until they actually tell us the money is available. At that time, we would have to negotiate what we could possibly use it for.
Okay, so you're not asking for us to make these final determinations then?
Oh, no,
tonight.
not at all.
You're just looking at
It's just informational.
information. Okay, great, thank you.
Out of curiosity, if Miller wasn't originally identified as part of the capital bond process.
Correct.
And so, out of curiosity, why the addition to that component?
Because
And
at least,
obviously, there's no elevator there, I get that.
Correct.
But we do have, a piece of equipment.
Yes,
that-
there's a
that
ramp
obviously,
there.
Transports equipment up, so was the idea when we did that would suffice for purposes of ADA compliance?
well, it does make the building compliant.
Okay,
So you wouldn't have to put an elevator in either building.
okay,
But if you remember when we spoke a couple meetings ago, we talked about moving forward and getting some rough numbers and estimates
Okay.
from a planning purpose about those particular projects.
Okay.
Those were things that had been identified by the Facilities Committee.
okay.
And we believe will be covered under the scope of the capital construction dollars if they are forthcoming.
Okay.
On the high school work, just reading through this, I was trying to figure out how many classrooms are there actually going to be enclosed? I was not able to really
The
figure
goal would
that
be to
out.
enclose all the classrooms that are currently not enclosed. Now, the issue will become, how much is the board willing to spend on that project? Because of the nature of the way the high school is built, any work there is going to be fairly expensive from a standpoint that you're going to be enclosing spaces and having to modify the HVAC and electrical systems, in entirety. There's clearly another concern is the current fire suppression system in that building is actually 3 separate systems. We have no doubt that if we do any modification of that building, the fire department is going to come in and want us to create one system. And so, you know, there are a lot of things that historically have just been ignored at the high school from a physical plant standpoint, and that if we do any major construction, it's going to cause some fundamental systems work. I think that's a fair statement, isn't it, Mike? You know, and that's, you know, that will have an impact on the cost. And that's why, again, it's really difficult as they're trying to develop estimates for that. You know, they've walked two vendors through to kind of say, give us some ideas, but the scope of the work and sort of the unique nature of the high school building in relationship to a lot of work that they would do makes it a complicated process. So the goal ultimately would be to enclose all of the high school classrooms. The question will become, is part of the capital construction bond fund particularly, if that money does come through, and there's at least, you know, I think a good chance that we'll get it this spring. If that does come through, we also have to put forward matching money on a 2-to-1 basis, if I remember correctly. So the question is, besides doing the elevator work at Manning and or potentially Miller, some other life safety thing, that would be a pretty legitimate way to use the matching funds that we have to provide to do that enclosure at the time. So as far as how many we could do for the amount of money the board is willing to spend, you know, that's all still up in the air. Those are variables.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if we would be doing it in like phases or the whole.
Always a possibility. You know, I mean, I think the one thought from the architect standpoint is at least you do half of the building one year and half the next year, just so that, you know, you're not tearing the whole thing apart at once.
Steve, the descriptions, though, seem like this work is focused on the entry of the high school and the office suite and the library area. So I was wondering the same thing as Kathy was. So for the initial work being done, it doesn't seem like that many classrooms are going to be affected by this, except the ones by the library.
Well, ultimately, all of the open classrooms are around the library, one way or the other.
Right. So so it's
Yeah,
the entire, because it said south, and I wasn't sure.
Yeah, that's the whole south ring that goes around the library. So,
all right, fine.
And the issue with that is the other issues that have been addressed a couple of times from the facilities committee process was trying to address the entrance
and the security
at the high school. And so this potentially, if you're going to make those internal changes, it makes sense to make all of those internal changes, assuming you can afford it. So.
Right, and the bathrooms obviously are something that needs to be addressed as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because we do have a number of wheelchair-bound students at the high school.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask if you can just briefly explain that? You said the 2-to-1 money.
The Capital Construction Board grant is $1.2 million, if I remember correctly. We have to put forward $2 for every dollar the Capital Construction Board gives us.
Is there a possibility that they may change that or waive that with the?
No, that was part of the actual grant application.
I highly doubt that they would waive that.
Well, but we have talked about the notion that they would give us credit for previous project work that we've done within the scope of like the working cash and stuff.
The original scope of the project was specific to elevators at Manning and some changes over at South, so I can't see where they would give us
really
credit.
depends.
So it would have to be Manning-specific dollars that they would.
The way the money was identified was for our schools that are over 100 years functionally.
Okay.
So Manning and South were the schools that were identified. We could probably make an argument that Miller is functionally close to that age. So I think that it would be included. I would agree with Steve.
We'll see.
So again, just let's keep our fingers crossed, we'll get this money in the spring. Then as a board, we will talk about where that would go.
Yes.
Right?
You do ask in here, though, you said the board may wish to move forward on these projects conditionally. Given the history here, I can't see doing.
No, I have no reason to think this money's coming.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and certainly it's good to be prepared. But if you were asked, if this question was built around the notion of Steve Cashman doing some additional work to get more specificity behind his scope and behind pricing, until we know if the money is actually available, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I offer that as an opportunity if the board wants to move forward, but it wouldn't be right in my recommendation.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay. The next item is board reports. Anybody want to jump in here?
I'll just jump in on the last SACID meeting was, I think, the 23rd of January, and there was a presentation about their transition program that they have at their Southeast School, which is on the corner of Maple and Naperville, their main campus there. And it was a transition program for students who are thinking about or plan to attend COD, and what they do is they take small groups of students, and these tend to be students with social and emotional issues, and they take them on a series of tours to COD in an effort to familiarize them with the campus and allow them to acclimate themselves to a large facility like that coming from a small special needs situation. And so they talked about that a little bit and talked about a series of 9 trips that they take and seeing different aspects of the campus. That's pretty much it for SACID. And Kathy and I met as a policy committee, and we went through the press recommendations for policy updates. And we also had a discussion, I brought up a concept of establishing some sort of mechanism where the policy committee would continually review board policies to see if there was anything that you would want to update with more, I guess, district-specific language. And just, we talked a little bit about maybe including that in as a board activity for the strategic plan, to kind of, where you have some sort of ongoing review process that might include the whole board as opposed to just the 2 people on the policy committee. And it might just get more involvement, and just to, you know, the policies, some of them should probably be tailored a little bit to district-specific needs. And
well, we talked about possibly having a representative from IASB come in and do a presentation about that, because we spoke to a representative from IASB, and she said that most boards don't have the time or inclination to want to do that. That, you know, if you do what we're doing, you know, you're at a pretty good place, and to take that next step is something that you can do. And she would, you know, give us some guidance on that if we were interested in doing that. So that would be something that maybe we can talk about as we get closer to the strategic planning process, to see if that's something that we want to include in the strategic planning. So
that sounds like a good idea. I know when all the IASB seminars we go to, they talk about the importance of your board policy manual in its entirety, reflecting the board's desires. So I think that sounds like a great idea.
and she was saying that there's ways to do it so that it's not burdensome. You know, you might want to do it topically. You might want to, you know, there's different ways to approach it. So, you know, she can give us some information on that.
Oh, thank you.
And then just quickly, I did ask that Dr. Ball include the job descriptions for the school psychologist and the guidance counselor in the board book, which you probably saw. But I think after some discussion at the last board meeting, we were kind of left, at least I was left with the impression that the guidance counselor position could kind of take on a lot of the slack from the school psychologist position. And when I look at the job descriptions, they are quite different. And I mean, just from reading it as a layman, I see the guidance counselor does mention providing guidance and counseling services to students, but I kind of picture that as being more general guidance, and then if there were really issues having to do with social or emotional concerns, that the guidance counselor would refer the student probably up the chain to the school psychologist, and then they would do more complete analysis. And I just wanted to, highlight that the positions, I was left last time with the impression that there was a little more overlap than there appears to be, at least from what I see here. And I also note with all of the articles in various papers and stuff that you see about what school boards are doing, what they're considering as far as cost cutting and things they're implementing, that having a certain level of support in your district may help your district from referring students out to outside placements. And that was one aspect that some districts were looking at, just as a way to kind of maintain or review their costs, and to see if they could actually, by providing more services in district, they would actually reduce their budgets for their outplacements. So I think it's something to think about as we talk about cost cuts and budgets. So that's why I asked that those items be included.
Okay, any other information on the board reports?
On the Finance Committee, we met February 2nd, and the output of that meeting is going to be included in the PMA presentation, as well as the list of suggested budget cuts. So that was that. And then the only other thing I had that I wanted to note out loud was the girls basketball team at the high school had a fantastic year. They finished the year 26-4, and so a very big congratulations to the girls and the boys as well, who went to the final game of the I-8 tournament. Just a great basketball season this year. So. Thank you.
Marie, I guess I have one more item from the renaming committee that met in January, and I wasn't able to attend that meeting, but I did review the minutes, and it looks like Mr. Forsley and Ms. Denard, a parent, were named the committee co-chairs, and then they discussed a little bit about the subcommittees that committee will break up into to discuss the aspects of renaming, or possibly renaming the junior high, and that was 3 committees: one finance and fundraising, one communication, and looking for the other one, it was communication and problems and solutions, although I think they've changed the name to something a little more pleasant sounding, I guess. So anyhow, that was the report from that. And there's a meeting of the renaming committee tomorrow at 7 o'clock in the at the junior high. That's all.
Okay.
I do have one announcement that I just thought of. The high school flag team qualified for state.
Yes.
And
I'm sorry.
that's okay. You reminded me when you brought up basketball. They will be performing at state on March 13th. If anybody feels like traveling down to Champaign-Urbana.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Let's move along to finance.
Would you mind if I go over just our regular finance reports quickly and give Mike a chance to get ready?
It's Mike time to set up.
Okay.
Attachment H2 is the school lunch report. Basically, we're still losing money on the program. You'll notice we're about $5,000 difference than we were last year, and that's primarily due to equipment purchases and a increase in the SACID reimbursement, which is just a different way that we're charging SACID for lunches for their children now. So unless there's any questions on that report. The next report is the summary fund balance for student activity accounts. We just have one account in the negative, and that's the incentive account at the high school, which Steve Carr will give me a transfer for. The fund balance summary for attachment H3. Again, the only account in the negative is the capital projects account, and that will turn around in June when we do the transfer. H3, the investment schedule. Again, I haven't invested any money with anybody except for Clarendon Hills since October now. Still getting that 0.75 rate at Clarendon Hills, so I'm just going to leave the money there. And then in the H4, 910 budget evaluation, since it's all over the papers and everywhere else, I thought I would just reiterate and point out again that the state controller is 124 days behind in payments that basically are vouchered by the State Board of Ed, says that they're okay to release. The controller has not released them. They're 124 days late. Last year and in prior years, they were about 2 to 5 days. So 124 days. It's pretty monumental. Right now, we are owed $363,000 in FY10 state payments that we've not received. So it's nowhere near 203 and 204's number, but it's still a good number for us. And again, unless we get that money and get it on time, which nobody anticipates we will, we'll definitely have some variances from our budget to our actuals at the end of the year. All the other funds look fine except for the transportation fund, where I will likely do a budget modification next month to account for the additional expenditures in the transportation fund. So if there are no questions.
So just, you noted in the tax collection discussion that our tax collections for this levy year are substantially above last year's.
Yeah, our total collection of the 2008 levy ended up at 99.7, which is right about where we normally are. Last year it was at 99.28 for the 07 levy, so we're almost back to normal.
Is that it, Maureen?
Mm-hmm.
Then the February 2010 expense report. Are there any questions on that? The chair will entertain a motion to approve the bills for the month of February 2010 as presented in attachment number H5 in the amount of $1,423,368.12. Roll call, please.
So moved.
I'm sorry.
Second.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Ms. Kelly?
Yes.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
So Mike Francis is here from PMA, which is our financial advising team. We're going to go over basically the same sort of presentation that we go over at this time every year. We've worked a couple of different scenarios for you. The first is what we consider our baseline scenario. And Mike will go through the assumptions that we used in the model and go over where we anticipate our fund balances to be in the next few years, given the baseline. And then we've asked him to work a few different scenarios based on cuts in state funding and based on some of the suggested budget cuts as well, which we'll go through. So I might interject here and there and cut Mike off. And if you have any questions, feel free to do the same.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm going to pass out what I'm going to present tonight is a summary of the report that Maureen is passing around. It's a more comprehensive look of the school district's finances, and the PowerPoint presentation that we have is really a summary of the information from that packet, really the high-level pieces that are, to give you an overview, for the people who don't want to read every single page, which is probably a lot of people get bored with finances, but you'll get a good sense of what's in that packet with this presentation. Typically, the FPP, the Financial Planning Program, is a program that's developed by our firm about 7 years ago or so, and the school district has been using it for a number of years, and we've come out typically once a year to present the board with an update and give them really a new roadmap of what happened over the last year, where they're at currently, and what the projections look like based on the new set of assumptions. And a number of things have happened really to the downside, even since a year ago, since we were out here last. Since then, there's a number of things that have been updated in the report. Obviously, the 2009 year ended, and when your annual financial report was completed by your auditors, and that's been imported into our program for actuals for the fiscal year ending last June 30th, 2009. We've also adopted a budget for 2010, has been imported also. And so now we have 5 years of projections which go from fiscal year 2011 through fiscal year 2015. We've updated your enrollment, your teacher scattergram, your staffing ratios, and there's various revenue and expenditure assumptions that we've updated also that I'm going to talk more about as we progress through the presentation. And Maureen touched on already, we've got a couple different scenarios. One with reduced general state aid funding, which is seeing more and more likely on a daily basis that this is a real possibility that this is most likely going to have some sort of reduction for that in that area next year. And then with a variety of expenditure cuts, we can show you how those would lay out in your projections also. This first pie chart shows you your operating revenue funds, including the 5 funds that are listed at the bottom of the page. They're the education, operation and maintenance, transportation, Illinois municipal retirement, and the tort fund. You can see here that your budget for those funds is about $23.7 million, which, with the majority of it coming in local property taxes. The other pieces are local, and really all these other pieces are what are more at risk than anything. The local property taxes are at least under the tax cap, which in essence guarantees no loss in tax funding. That's the positive news. The other areas are really at risk for, they've already gone down or they're potentially going to go down in the next upcoming years. You're on your other local revenue side, those are things made up of a tax called the corporate personal property replacement tax. That amount has already been reduced in this year's budget. The Department of Revenue has estimated that source of revenue down 17% in this particular fiscal year. Your investment income, Maureen said that you've got all your money at the local bank here, which is giving you 75 basis points on your deposits, which is a good rate of return. It's a lot lower than it was 2 or 3 years ago when you were earning probably 4 or 5% on that. That's a local source of revenue that's gone the wrong direction. It's sort of shrunk over the last couple of years. And even though short-term rates might rise, those amounts in your budget have been constricted pretty dramatically. General state aid, another state, this is the one we've got the scenario on with the reduction of that alternate formula we'll talk about a little bit more. And then the federal revenue, that piece right there, the $1.5 million, is really supported by almost $450,000 or so of one-time stimulus dollars through the or known as ERA stimulus dollars for this year really only. So that piece is going to go be reduced also. The assumptions that we're using for each of those different pieces of the pie are as follows. For property taxes, your additional property taxes you receive on an annual basis are really based on 2 things only. The amount of new construction EAV, or equalized assessed valuation, that's added to the tax base on an annual basis, and the consumer price index. So let's take a look at each of one of those. This graph here shows you your new growth in millions of dollars, and this is taxable new property dollars. This is not the amount of dollars that the district received in addition to the outside the tax cap. This is the amount of additional taxable property that was accessible to be taxed outside the tax cap. The bars in blue are actual amounts through 2008, and you see when times were booming and construction was still happening, those amounts were growing, and they started to come down last year, and really are going to continue to come down and almost flatten out in the next couple of years as really nothing is happening in this particular area. Now, this is really less than 1% of your equalized assessed valuation. Your total equalized assessed valuation is about $600 million. And a $6 million increase to it would add about 1% EAV growth, or 1% additional taxes above and beyond the consumer price index. which is what I'm going to touch on next. The consumer price, being 79% reliant on property taxes, which is typical of a school district, not exactly typical, but in the northeast area of Chicago, most of the school districts are more reliant on property taxes than they are from the state of Illinois. And so this, under the tax cap law, the consumer price index is the main driver of additional revenue on an annual basis. Now, the levy that the school district just adopted last month for taxes that are going to be collected this June and September is based on the 2008 CPI, which drives the 2009 levy, which again was done a month ago, which is at 0.1%. So property taxes are only going to grow by 0.1% from the existing tax base for this coming tax collection, which is partly collected this year and partly collected next year. Now, I guess a good piece of information is the consumer price index for 2009 has been now known for about a month, and that's 2.7%, and that's driving your 2010 levy, which is going to be adopted by the board about 11 months or 10 months from now, driving property taxes in June and September of 2011. So what you do know is really for almost the next 2 fiscal years, you know what your property taxes collections are going to be, which again is 80% of your revenue.
And just to recap a number, so we have about $18 million of property tax collections in our budget. So that 1/10 of 1%, means that even if you collect it all, it means the revenue, which is the primary driver of our growth revenue, is going to grow by a grand total of nearly $20,000 for the entire year as opposed to last year, against expenses that obviously are, and we'll talk about those later, but expenses that are clearly going to grow by substantially higher rates. Is that?
Plus new property.
Plus new property and we're catching obviously the 2008 event, but 2009 and 2010 effectively we're sort of down, looking probably something close to really close to zero there as well.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. But the $6 million, the number above 2009 is the unknown, is really what's driving this June and September's collections. Now you'll know what that number ultimately is in about a month or so, but based on estimates you've gotten from the assessor, right, that number should be real close to what's projected here.
What was the other thing? Were there, you've got $23.7 million in total revenue. Were there changes to the final budget between there and here and there?
Not yet.
Okay.
No, I'll amend the budget probably next month.
Okay, but is this updated to reflect sort of some of the stuff that you know?
Didn't want to confuse the issue, no.
Okay, okay.
Because, yeah, I thought that would probably, we talked about it. I've got a couple of things that actually are outside of the 010 budget that I know of right now. I'm going to be over budget.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
We worked them in 2011, the 2 items that I'm aware of and that are way over budget. So I actually worked those into 2011. So they are worked in, but not in the correct year.
But in the difference that, as I'm holding it then, because I look at the operating funds as our 4 primary funds, inclusive of tort, but you're actually also including IMRF. In this presentation.
Right, and we always have.
Okay.
Okay. Just finishing up on the consumer price index, we're using 2.5% for the projections for driving levies in 2011 and beyond. Again, this is, and the 2.5% is really the average of what the CPI has been. If you look at it over 10, 20, or even 50 years, it really is right around 2.5%. Moving back, again, just finishing up on local revenue assumptions back on page 4, is that corporate personal property replacement taxes, or CPPRT, we're projecting, even though, remember, that amount in the budget's already been reduced by almost 20%. In the current budget, we're holding that amount flat for in the projections. The investment rate of return, we're holding flat also at 75 basis points. And all other local revenue, we're holding flat over the current budgeted amounts.
Out of curiosity, I mean, is that pretty common to hold the investment rate of return flat for 5 years with the other districts you guys work with?
It is up until a week or two ago when some information came out that there's more and more likely that the Fed will raise the short-term rate starting maybe in the summertime at a quarter-point ticks. Now, when that's exactly going to happen or how that's going to happen, it's hard to say. The other side is that you're at 75 basis points, your yield is pretty good. So even if they're able to reduce the short-term rate, there's no guarantee that you'd even be able to earn more than 75 basis points until you got a couple quarter-point ticks up. So I think, and the third piece is that even though we're projecting 5 years, and we always have our clients look out 5 years, the state is in such a mess right now that you really need to look at 1 to 2 years at the most. And as I mentioned, your property taxes are really already known for the next 2 years. And you're not going to get much more than 75 basis points over the next 2 years. So even though we want you to look out, we want to show you what 5 years could be, you really need to focus on what FY11 and FY12 mean for you and what adjustments you need to make in those years' budgets. Moving on to state funding, the foundation level, which is set each year by the General Assembly, is currently $6,119 per child. That is not the amount of money that you receive from the state. You receive an amount much lower than that. But that is the driver in the general state aid formula. And we're projecting in the base model a $0 increase to the foundation level. Typically, this amount goes up annually, at least a couple $100 on average over the last 6 or 7 years. But there is no sign whatsoever that this number will rise for next year. And again, as the superintendent noted, it's probably going to be reduced.
I was going to say there's a possibility, instead of eliminating flat grant and alternative grant funding, another option the state may consider is just reducing the foundation level, which would actually drive many more districts to the alternative funding table, which would cut their funds significantly. And that wouldn't have that direct of an impact on us unless it pushed us into the flat grant status, which it may or may not. But you know, as Mike said, there are so many different variables with state funding right now that we kind of took a look at best case scenario, which is no increase, and worst case scenario, which could come in a variety of variables, but in scope is probably about the same as the elimination of our general state aid.
And for our purposes, we only looked at reductions in general state aid, again, which seem to be more and more likely. That's what the House Education and Secondary Committees are saying, that there might be a 10% reduction in this particular foundation level number. You get money from the state in really two forms: general state aid and categorical reimbursements. They're going to reduce, most likely, if they make a reduction, it's going to be in one or both, or one or the other, or both. We don't know exactly how they're going to do that. But fortunately for you, only 7% or so of your budget is funded by the state, and you have much less at risk than a lot of other school districts in the state, that some are which are funded by more than 50% with state funding. You're on the alternative formula, as we mentioned, that this is one of those things that's potentially on the chopping block to be reduced completely, except for the poverty portion of that, which is going to cost, which is about $450,000 to $470,000 annually for your school district. And that's the piece that we looked at in terms of the scenario and said, what if we lost that completely? What do the projections look like?
You did, but did you take it out completely in that scenario?
Yes.
As in down to zero?
Not all of general state aid is in two portions. One is the alternate formula amount, and then the other is poverty.
You took the alternate out.
No, we only get alternate. We took all the alternate funding out, but we left the poverty grant, which is generally included on the scope of general state aid, but is actually other funding.
Okay.
That's right.
I had looked ahead, and it looked like when you did that, the number that came out of the revenue piece was like 380,000 as opposed to 470.
Should be about $430,000 if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I have the exact numbers, and it's more closer to, I think it's more, I think it's about, okay.
Okay, I
Maybe-
believe.
And it fluctuates each year. I mean, it's not exactly the same each year. And there's a poverty piece that which is about 160 or 170,000 that we maintain in the projections.
Okay. And that's fairly conventional wisdom right now as we talk to other districts, that we don't anticipate that they would cut the poverty money. The other issue is why we chose general state aid as opposed to the mandated categoricals. Is you may be aware of Representative Rogeretti, who's from downstate, has put forward a bill in the House to basically allow school districts to waive any unfunded mandate. Now, there are, a fair amount of co-sponsors to the bill at this point in time, including our local representatives, Patty Bellick and Sandy Pihos, have both signed on to that. But there are some caveats because some representatives are afraid that if they don't fund it, school districts won't do it. And so we're more likely to see a general state aid loss than just a across-the-board reduction in categoricals that are all tied to mandated requirements. And so we'll see how that bill goes. It's supposed to be called in a week or so, and hopefully, it'll pass and move to the Senate. So, which could potentially also provide us some relief in some areas.
Our general state aid's $475,000, our poverty grant's $140,000.
Can I ask a question? What is flat grant status?
A flat grant status means if you're funded locally, means if your property taxes and a couple other things are 175% of the foundation level, which is, you take the foundation level, which is 6119, and multiply it by 175%, which gets you about 10,000 or so. If you fund locally $10,000 per student, then you are in what the state considers a flat grant district, where you receive 218. You still get general state aid, even though you're above the foundation level, but you get $218 per ADA, or average daily attendance, as a flat amount.
Thank you.
Now you're approaching that level. You're currently at about 150% of the foundation level, and our projections, that percentage is going up till, say, 160 or so. When you hit 175, you become flat grant status. Now, if the foundation level were to be reduced by 10%, your percentage would rise automatically. And as the superintendent mentioned, that there's some foundation level districts that if they reduce the foundation level, get switched to alternate funding formula, because their percentage of local property all of a sudden, or local funding, all of a sudden becomes more, because the number that they're comparing to just went down.
Thank you.
For other state and federal grants, we're holding them flat over the current budget. And then finally, for FY11, we reduced the federal revenue by $468,000, which is the amount of error that you have currently in this year's budget, or the stimulus dollars. Are there any other questions on revenue? If not, we'll move forward to expenditures on page 8. This pie chart shows your current operating fund or adopted budget for operating funds of $24.5 million. And while lots of school districts are funded differently in their sources of local or state revenue, most school districts' expenditures really look like this, where the vast majority of expenditures are in salary and benefits. Really, the piece that might fluctuate a little bit is the amount of outsourced services that you might have if you outsource transportation or custodial maintenance or food service. Then that purchase service area might fluctuate a little bit. And then finally, you've got other objects, which is really your special education or outside placement costs. Capital outlay is 3% of your budget, and supplies and materials at 8%. So we're going to talk about the assumptions that are driving each of these pieces of that pie forward in our projections.
Just before you do, just a note, to note out loud. So we have revenue, total operating revenue, including the IMRF, 23.7 million. We basically have 24.5 million in operating fund expenditures, including the retirement fund. That's a negative $810,000 for the year.
That's right. Your current deficit is $810,000. Starting with salaries and teacher salaries for, I believe your contract expires this year, and so we had to make an assumption for additional costs for teacher salaries in the model. We actually have your current scattergram built, and teachers progress a step on an annual basis. And what we've done is increase the base or each salary by 2%, plus any teacher that's eligible for a step increase would also receive that step increase on top of that 2% base pay bump. For administrative salaries, there's no projected increase for FY11 and 2% for each year thereafter. And all other salaries for each year are projected at 2% annually, minus custodians, which I believe has a contract for FY11 and which is currently at 3.9%. On the health and dental side, which is again the second largest piece of your expenditures, projecting health benefits at a 9.5% increase to the board contribution for next year and then 9% annually thereafter. On other expenditures, yeah, go ahead, Mel.
Now, the medical premiums you just approved tonight saved us $6,000 over this, so we got $11,000 on the plus side so far.
So it's 9.3, right?
9.2.
2, excuse me.
But that's not worked into the model.
Right.
So the 6,000 will be saved over the model. Little victories.
They compound over 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
They do. They do. And you can see your finances are constantly in a state of change. And as you know and more information, we update our, so the information you have today is really stale as of today. And as you get more information, it continually gets updated. In the Ed Fund, we're not growing purchase services, supplies, or capital outlay budgets over the current level for FY11, and then there's 2.5% increases thereafter. There is one adjustment in special education tuition. We're projecting a 4% increase, but we also made a budget adjustment, I believe, in the amount of $180,000 for, if you want to expound on that.
That was the bills I told you about earlier that I already know we're over budget for fiscal year 10. So we pushed those into 11 just so you could see that number worked into the model.
Can I ask a question back at the salaries here?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
We're using an assumption of 2% for the teacher salaries in addition to their step increase.
Mm-hmm.
So what would that actually be equivalent to?
Step costs us 1.65%.
1.65?
Right. Based on the current scattergram where everybody sits in the model, moving them down just 1 year costs us 1.65%, which is about, we were just talking about this yesterday, $98,000 per percent.
Right.
So
that's almost
so the
just a little
teachers
under
would actually be at 3.65?
correct.
Correct.
Whereas we're projecting a 2% for the rest of the employees?
Except the custodians who are still in their old contract, so their FY11 raise would be 3.9.
You said each 100 basis points or each 1% change is about $98,000.
For teachers.
For
Right.
teachers,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
There's one other factor that we haven't mentioned yet. There's also a provision in our program for lane changes. And there's an additional amount of money that costs the school district for teachers that progress from, say, the bachelor's education to a master's degree. And I don't know, do you remember what we put in for that?
I can find it.
It's usually about 1%. It's actually a little under. It's usually about $60,000 to $70,000 a year.
We actually put in a dollar amount.
Right, we can convert that into a percentage, though, and it's usually between another 0.5% to 1% of additional costs. I mean, that's, as a rule of thumb, that's kind of like the average of what lane changes cost the school district, somewhere between 0.5% and 1%. I don't remember off the top of my head what we use in this particular district, but that would be actually in addition to step and base costs also. And that we do have that factored in the program.
Okay, well then I would like to see some assumptions here where
you will
perhaps
You're getting
we
ahead of
see a
us.
little bit. Pardon?
You will. You're getting ahead of us.
Oh,
Let her finish her
Yeah,
question.
that's one of the things
One
that
of the other
actually Dan had asked
scenarios?
us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, didn't mean to jump ahead.
That's okay.
In the O&M fund, we have purchase services and supplies. Again, the administration realizes that the revenue is restricted for next year, so we're starting with a base model of not growing any other expenditures. The things that we're trying to contain for next year, and no increase over the current budget. but the 2.5% increases thereafter. That should actually say in that second line on the O&M fund, I just noticed that should say FY12 through 15 is a 2.5% annual increase. Capital outlay, we're freezing for each of the 5 years over the current budget. In the transportation fund, we're increasing that at 5% annually, but we've also removed all the ERA expenditures that are in the current year budget out of next year's budget. And again, and that is about $400,000 of expenditures that we've removed in FY11 for those one-time ERA expenses. The next page shows your enrollment history and projections. This typically is really, it's almost immaterial in this particular situation because it does two things. It drives your average daily attendance, but here you're seeing your enrollment projections are basically flat. So we're projecting a real stable average daily attendance, which is driving that state aid, which might go away, and it typically also drives staffing. But for the model purposes here, you currently have 123.6 teaching certified staff members, and that has been reduced by a half a person in the base model for FY11, but that amount is being held flat regardless of enrollment at this particular point, to give you a real good baseline of what changes could be to that and how that affects your finances. Finally, some other assumptions are really broad and general in nature. There's no change to legislative changes to school funding or the tax cap or general state aid formulas. Again, some of those things, you never know what's going to happen in the General Assembly. No significant programmatic changes, and we do know of 24 people that are retiring over the next 5 years. Those cost savings have all also been incorporated into your projections, and those retirees are being projected to be replaced at an entry salary in your master's lane step 5, which is about $59,000 for the current year. And then finally, that your current budget is an accurate base for the projections. Outside of the adjustments we made, like that special ed payment we know that you're going to be over budget on, we have no basis to know that your current budget is a good one on the expenditure level to project from. So the assumption is that everything else is a good starting point to project based on these assumptions your FY11 costs. What that means to your projections. Again, this is an aggregate view of your operating funds. Again, they're listed at the bottom of this slide, the 5 operating funds that we're looking at. Comparing revenues to expenditures. Again, this is your baseline projections. The first column shows your local, state, and federal budgeted revenues at the $23.7 million amount, expenditures at $24.5 million, and as was mentioned earlier, you have a deficit of just under $810,000 for the current budget year. You do have transfers. Right below that, there's a transfer coming in of $241,000, which is a transfer of interest from your working cash fund. We're not showing that transfer, any types of transfers in the future. One of the reasons is that we can do that. You are earning some working cash fund interest in the future, but it's substantially lower than this amount. I believe it's about $20,000.
It was. The $241,000 that's transferred for this year is a specific investment. Remember, this is a cash basis. Specific investment that was invested for 2 years. We earned $235,000 of interest on. We are getting nowhere near those rates anymore, so I believe it was 20 to 30. And I did just find the number that we worked in here for lane changes was $60,000 additional.
So that translates into about 2/3 of another 2/3 of a percent. Right. Yeah. The beginning audited fund balances for those 5 funds is $13.3 million, and based on that deficit plus the transfer of interest, that fund balance would be reduced this year to $12.7 million, again estimated for the end of this current fiscal year, which is translates into about 52% of expenditures, which is a really good number. Your current fund balance is strong. I mean, the state recognizes school districts that have more than a 25% fund balance or 3 months of cash on hand at the end of the year. You have about 6 months of cash on hand, which is not unreasonable, but it's a good, strong level. But you need to be concerned as that percentage potentially goes down. Really looking out 1 year in FY11, that $810,000 structural deficit grows to about $1.5 million. Really with, if you look at the back up to the revenue in that second column, revenue is actually declining. A lot of it is because of, remember that ERA money is going away. That's $468,000 is being removed from a revenue source. Your local revenue is barely growing because of the 0.1 CPI. And the state revenue we've got, which is growing, part of that is because there's a shift from federal to state. Some of your state aid this year is coming in the form of stabilization funds that are federal dollars. Actually, the payment you got last week and the next two payments that you're going to get in general state aid is the state is funding with ERA money. So they were able to supplant their own budget and say, we can't make a general state aid payment to this year or this month, but we've got money from the federal government. We're going to pay you general state aid with that money. Okay, so part of that, you've got that budgeted as federal revenue this year. That's going up to state revenue for next year. That's why you really see an increase in that state aid line item for next year, even though we're holding that foundation level flat. Salaries and benefits are increased together to go up 3.2%, and all other expenditures are really trying to maintain current levels of expenses and pulling out ERA dollars. Your other expenses are going down almost 2%, but they're going to grow at 1.8% overall in this base model, which again is almost doubling the size of your deficit from $810,000 to $1.5 million. This is really what you need to be concerned with: expenses over revenue. Are we spending more money on a 12-month basis than we're receiving? And if you are, you need to fix that problem. If you don't fix it today, you'll need to fix it eventually, because the revenue is not going to catch up to your expenditure amounts unless you reduce the expenditures. Do you have a question?
Just this 241,000, is this, this is not in this excess deficit number, right? I mean,
that's right. You would have to, you net those two, and really your fund balance would fall by the difference, which is about, what, 570,000.
Okay.
That's really what your fund balance would be reduced by.
Okay, thank you.
In those 5 funds. Okay, and you can see that really is concentrating on that middle line that's red. That deficit grows. It doesn't grow substantially over the current amount based on the, again, the current assumptions we have in the baseline, but it does continue to grow. And that percentage of fund balance at the bottom there goes from 52%, if you were to stay down this path, down to about 11% level. This is what that looks like graphically. This shows you history also. The red line is a summary of the 5 funds fund balance from 05 through 09. Those are actual audited numbers, and that line is pretty well flat, meaning that you really had the amount of money that was coming in was almost equal to the amount of money that you were spending on an annual basis, and your fund balance was relatively flat over the last 5 years or so. But starting in 09, you did have a deficit. You did have that between 08 and 09. That fund balance did shrink about $400,000 or $500,000, and based on the current budget between 9 and 10, that's where you see that $570,000 decline, that difference between the 810 and the 240 of interest coming in. And obviously, that slope starts to go down moving out. And those numbers you see along the red line are the same numbers you'll see on the previous page in terms of the estimated fund balances. The blue line is representative of the low point you have in cash. Again, the red line is representative of the June 30th fund balance you have at the end of the fiscal year, after you receive June property taxes. But before you receive June property taxes, you have a low point in the checking account. Well, what is that low point? So we try to back out property taxes that you receive in June, all your state payments that you might receive in June, and all of your expenses that you have in June also. And we try to estimate what is the district's low cash point. And to the extent that that's above 0, that means you're flush, you have enough money to make current expenditures throughout the whole year. When the blue line goes below 0 is when you would need to supplement your current dollars with some type of short-term loan to either make payroll or to pay bills in that particular month. And that doesn't happen in this particular model until fiscal year 2013.
So to just reiterate, no programmatic changes per se. Just sort of a very as is.
Status quo
district.
Right.
With some assumptions, obviously, about salary growth,
Right.
which will still need to be worked out. We clearly don't run out of funds this school year. We don't run out of funds next school year, 2011, or the year after that. But in 2013, at the low point on May 31st, we're $1 million in the hole on May 31st and trying to figure out how to cut payroll checks.
That's accurate. So we ran a scenario, what does that look like if we cut all the alternate funding, that $430,000 or so annually that you get from the alternate formula of your general state aid amount? We said, what if that just goes away? And that goes away for the next 5 years. So that's a loss each year of approximately that amount.
How many dollars did you say?
It's somewhere between $430 and $450. It does fluctuate annually based on the calculation of the formula, but it's on an average, it's probably about $450 each year over the 5 years.
$475.
Is it?
Yeah, it's $475. I just pulled it up.
But you can see here, in that case, now obviously your red line slopes much faster, and your blue line does also, because those are always going to parallel each other. And even though you still have some cash in 2012, you barely have any cash to make payroll on May 31st in 1 year earlier. So you're really close to running out of cash 1 year earlier in this particular scenario.
And I want to point out that this is also based on getting our payments on time for everything else, which hasn't happened this year. We just got the first payment in December for 2009, which started in July. So again, even though that's a $314,000 number, I don't want to be the one sitting here trying to determine whether or not checks are going to bounce on May 31st of 2012, because that is based on a huge assumption right now, given the finances of the state.
If you were this close to running out of money in a district this size, you would do a short-term borrowing just in case some revenue didn't come in. You can't get this low in your checking account. Your payroll.
That $314,000 could be representative of one new severe special ed student come in the district. That would wipe that balance out entirely by itself over 3 years.
Sure.
If we had to put them in outplaced.
If they came today and stayed, yeah, absolutely.
So I mean that's effectively that's no money. That's a zero balance effectively.
And again, we didn't just pick general state aid in a vacuum. This is the one that the state, what we're hearing is that, the LEND group and IASBO and all of the groups that Steve and I are members of and that represents as well, feel that this is the most likely to be hit.
Well, and it may not be this particular fund, but it's going to be this scope of, pretty much everybody's anticipating this is the sort of the scope of impact we may see. So if you look at the two, we gave you a baseline as sort of best case scenario, and this isn't really worst case scenario, but this is what we anticipate as a realistic scenario.
And it gets to the question, is the feeling that if GSA piece of the aid is cut, that it's going to be a permanent cut?
Oh, yeah.
I would assume
Like
so,
forever.
absolutely.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's
I would
not coming
assume
back.
so, yeah.
Yeah, if the state figures out a way to cut it,
because that's, I mean,
we'll
it
never
affects
get it
us
back.
a certain way,
Right.
but it affects other districts far more dramatically.
but if they cut the tiers of we're the only state in the union, I believe. If we're not the only, we're one of very few that have a 3-tiered state aid formula.
Okay.
Most states just simply either give you state aid, or they give you a flat amount, or they, you don't get it depending. There are very few districts that have the 3-tiered formula, from my understanding, right? If the district as Mike mentioned earlier, to make general state aid payments this year, the state had to borrow effectively $992 million from the federal government. So short of $1 billion through the ARRA funding, which was actually intended to be given to school districts. So instead of doing that, they used it to cover general state aid and said indirectly they are giving it to school districts, all right? Because they used the ARRA money, they can only cut general aid so far. They can only cut general aid back to, general state aid to the total appropriation it was in 2007, I believe.
I thought it was 6, but it might be
6,
7.
okay. In the last, depending upon whatever they base, what the feds base the primary year for. So they still have to give that much money in appropriations, but they don't have to divide it out the same. So in reality, the easy way to cut that, because you can't cut everybody across the board because there are downstate districts that will fold up. Heck, there are Cook County districts that couldn't make payroll in November this year because the state aid payments were so late. Given that the most reasonable situation is that if that ends up being what they need to do to balance their budget is cut general state aid, they would cut the flat grants and they would cut the alternative formula grants, of which we are one, and leave the districts that are really, quote, the poor districts whole. Make sense?
It does, and unfortunately, hopefully they would do that, because again, your district, the other districts throughout the state, and there are over 800 districts in the state, and most of them are funded through the foundation level formula, that are funding below that 6,119, they would be devastated.
Right. There are two other things that the state, that you hear being spoken about when we talk about state funding. One is that they will tell you there's 12, school districts in Illinois have $12 billion in reserves. That is correct if you take all of the fund balances for all the districts. Well, the state is, if you remember, short $12 billion. So the theory is make the districts all pay down their reserves before they do anything. Now, of course, the money isn't properly allocated to do that in a thoughtful way. There are districts that have no reserves. There are districts that have a ton of reserves. And then the other piece is the piece of legislation in the House right now, and the bill number I can't remember, that Roger Eddy has put forward that would reduce our requirements for mandated, for unfunded mandates, theoretically would give the district some relief. Now, in reality, that bill probably won't be passed in such a way to give us real relief this year because staff doing those things are already going to be in place. But theoretically, for next year, if there are things that we don't have to do because the state doesn't fund, we could get some additional relief that way. So if they say, okay, we're going to cut general state aid, but we're also going to give you more flexibility on unfunded mandates, they'll feel that, you know, they're kind of helping you out. They're going to cut general state aid, but they're going to make you do less. Make sense?
Yeah, but
Right.
is it the same pay structure? I mean,
well, you know, the things, some of those things are mandated, you know, we can't just not, you know, if we already have staff in place to do them, we can't just say, okay, you know, we don't have to hire that staff tomorrow when we've already gone by the statutory deadline to release staff. And so in most cases, that would be an issue for the year after. We would be able to accommodate some issues potentially.
And most of the significant unfunded mandates are exempt from in that bill.
There was originally was just a straight out bill. I believe a group of legislators got together and basically said there are all these things that are, you know, all the special ed mandates are exempted, high school graduation requirement related mandates are exempted. There are a couple other things, transportation, that have been put in there to be exempted. And so it probably won't have, it's clearly a good piece of legislation. It moves in the right direction, but it's probably not going to have the impact we would like to see it have.
And exempted meaning that it's still an unfunded mandate that you have to fund?
No. Well, if it's, yes, if it's exempted from.
Understood. I just wanted to say it out loud.
It's 4711 is the bill number.
4711? So call your legislator and tell them to please vote for House Bill 4711. As I mentioned before, Patty Belloc is one of the co-sponsors of the bill, so you can call her and thank her for co-sponsoring it.
Well, finally, we have two looks at the same scenario, really, one with and without the general state aid. And in this scenario here, we've taken that base model and to it we've reduced the following areas: 3 administrative positions, 3 support staff positions, 4.4 teaching staff positions, and for starting for next year. Also, we've assumed a class size increase to 30 students in the elementary grades, which is an additional reduction of staff, of certified staff for next year of 3.5. So the total teaching staff reduction next year would be 7.9. And then finally, grade level centers for FY12, which would potentially facilitate an additional reduction of certified staff in FY12 of 4.5 FTE or full-time equivalent positions. Now, what does that look like in terms of numbers? The first column here is exactly the same because that's your 2010 budget. What changes really is when those is 11 and 12 because most of those changes affect the 11 expenditures, and one of those changes affects the 12 expenditures. So what does that look like? It cuts that over a $1.5 million deficit down to about $618,000 for next year, and then down to under $400,000 for the following year. Again, even with those levels of reductions, you're still not at a balanced budget, but you have a much more palatable level of deficit over the next 2 years.
So that's effectively just, and regardless of sort of the actual ways we get there, if I just look at this, the raw number goes from $1,550,000 baseline as a negative in fiscal year 2011 to a 618 negative, or 620 call it, which is 900.
Right, it's in excess of 930, about 930. And
so it's finding $930,000 of cuts to get to this point.
That's right.
Next year.
Right. And there's a couple of $100,000 of cuts additional in FY12 that gets you a little bit of a better position in FY12.
Which is the grade level center.
That's right.
Okay.
So the numbers on page 18 reflect the possible expenditure reductions that are listed in 17.
That's exactly right.
Okay, got it.
And then this is what that looks like graphically. Here, those deficits show that red line reduced on an annual basis, where that slope is going down, but your cash position actually stays above zero throughout the life of the projections with those cuts. Where the low point is $632,000 and out into 2015. What that looks like without the general state aid, again, so we did the exact same thing. What if we lost that alternate formula funding at $475,000, right, Mo? Mm-hmm. Each year for alternate funding? What does it look like? And again, I think it looks similar to what the original chart looked like in terms of where you end up. But again, you would run out of, again, your low point in cash goes south of zero in 2014.
So making the safe assumption that we're going to lose GSA money, even if we cut $930,000 and go to grade level centers, we still run out of money in
2014.
2014.
Yeah, based on the other assumptions that we have in the model.
Well,
and those,
and that
again, there's
obviously that crystal ball gets pretty foggy out there.
It does.
But I think the larger theme though is that spreadsheet guys. So none of these numbers on the spreadsheet ever become positive. They just bleed.
That's right. Expenses over revenue.
I just bleed. And it's just a question of how much I bleed, how fast I bleed, and when do I run out of blood.
That's right.
When the question becomes to the board, how much do you want the staff to come back with recommendations to cut? And this shows you what happens. And again, the possible reductions there are simply illustrative at this point. Those aren't guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. One of the things that was articulated by the Finance Committee is they wanted us to consider, grade level centers and the potential costs that could be saved there. And again, there's more cost savings with grade level centers depending upon whether or not elementary class size is increased.
Now, I have a question. Are any of these suggested potential budget cuts incorporated in any of this?
Yes, the ones that are articulated right there.
Okay.
Some of which are also indicated on that page
yeah.
that was in our
Yes.
board book.
Yes.
Okay, this is a little more general across the board, major kind of.
So the
edge.
last, in terms of this page 17, the two that really aren't on the list per se are the bottom two, which is this notion of increasing class size and grade level centers. not on the.
Right, they're not on the.
Correct.
The list.
Spreadsheet list.
Right, the
Yes.
spreadsheet list.
Right.
But again, there
I
are.
want to point one thing out that I was just asking Mike about. When we're removing any of these staff members from the model, we're removing them at the average salary. So if we're removing a certified staff member, the average salary is $78,000.
Okay.
We might not actually get that savings because obviously when you
savings will
riff, you
actually
riff
be
from the bottom
less.
up. You riff your less expensive teachers.
So in other words, so this page 17 actually wasn't specific.
Hold on.
When I say average is
Oh, when you say, okay, sorry. Okay, so he's telling me we reduced at the MA5, which is
Okay.
what we would replace them at. But again, I guess still you could make that argument
Okay.
depending on who we reduce. MA5 is 59,000, we might
Yeah.
be reducing somebody down at a 42,000 salary.
So, so to recapitulate that, because it matters, is, and Maria, it gets to your point, on page 17, like these top 3 points, they don't, what they're saying is, it doesn't tie to a recommendation on the spreadsheet.
Not directly.
Not directly.
No, not directly.
Right? So it's just.
That shows you the
this is
scope
if you
of cuts
take-
will
yeah,
need to be
scope of
made.
cuts.
This scope of cuts will need to be made to get the board to still have a fund balance in 2015, assuming flat general state aid.
Yes.
If we are going to assume less than flat general state aid, then some additional scope of cuts will need to be made beyond this.
Okay, Maureen did the scenario that I
Yeah,
talked
actually,
about.
we didn't print them up, and I apologize for that. But Dan had asked me to work 2 separate models based on a 1% increase in the teacher salaries.
It's a baseline model, though. It doesn't incorporate the cuts.
Doesn't incorporate the cuts. So the baseline model with a 1% decrease would get you to a negative $649,000 cash balance in 2013, excuse me. So if you compare that to the baseline, which is on page 15 of this model, so it would bring us up from a negative 967 up to a negative 650.
So you're still not making
It
payroll.
doesn't make it still doesn't move the year in which we run out of money.
Well, that's
No.
1%.
And that's the-
That's a 1% plus step.
Right.
Now, Dan also asked for a 0% plus step, and that would get you to a negative $378,000, again, in 2013. So again, it doesn't change the year in which you run out of the money.
She's saying
13.
But it's about 300,000, you're saying,
Yeah.
each?
Negative.
Each percent is about $1,000.
Is $100,000.
$100,000, more or
$100,000.
less. And that compounds over 3 years to
And I-
300,000.
At the, in order to assuage some horror that might exist right now, hearing some of that stuff, those scenarios were for 1 year.
Correct. That was just in the
For 1 year.
2010-11 school year.
So.
0% and a 1% in that first year, and then leaving the subsequent years at 2% plus step.
The idea in my request was, clearly .1 is just a career-changing number for school districts in a tax-capped, state and era. It's just a total career-changing event. Districts are going to be affected by that for effectively a year and a half, sort of a year and a half of school district years. The other part that's career changing, in particular for 201, is this notion of losing state aid. And that's not as acute for us as some other districts, but it is still acute because it's all stuff that we're going to have to find because we don't have the money anymore. So, but I had to say out loud, I asked for that 1% and 0% was effectively for FY11. Now, the power behind that is that if you save $200,000 in FY11, you save it again in 12, and again in 13, and again in 14, and again in 15. So it adds up to, so finding money today is critical because it compounds. The same is true of income. You know, and actually one of the things that I asked Maureen to do in the scenarios we ran was I actually increased CPI ever such a little bit, like to 2.7. You know, I
Yeah,
figured
those numbers, I'm sorry, you're right, those numbers that I just gave you also include an increase in the CPI up to 2.7.
Yeah. And the reason for that, the thinking behind that is this. We've assumed the worst case with GSA. You know, I want to offset that at some level. And more importantly, if you look back at page 6, rolling 5 between 2005 and 2009, if you add up those percentages and divide them by 5, it's 2.68%. If you add in 2010 at 2.7 and call it a rolling 6-year number, it's 2.68%, which felt like 2.7. I mean, that was my rationale. There's no magic to it, and there's no magic to 2.5. I think 2.5 is a reasonable assumption to model, and then, you know, every January we all, I hope at some point, go to bed, cross our fingers, and pray that, you know, we get a little bit of inflation every year above that, because that can solve a world of sin.
I'd rather assume the 2.5 than the 2.7.
Huh?
I'd rather assume the 2.5 than the.
No, I know. And the alternate scenarios I asked for were just more an academic request for me in terms of the impact of reducing those salaries for 1 year. And increasing CPI for that period of time as well. 0.2 on 20 million is
40,000.
And remember, you won't get that until FY.
No, I get it.
That's what I was just going to say, yeah.
That doesn't come immediately.
Yeah.
So that's why there's not as much, most of that savings would be in the salaries. And then you'd see the increase in the CPI out in the last 2 or 3 years. Because if that happens, you don't get that money until FY 12 or 13.
So let me say those numbers out loud again. Just with 1% salary growth in 2011, you effectively save, $100,000 a year, and you run out of money. Instead of being 2013 being a negative $1 million, you're a negative $650. So cumulatively in 4 years, it adds up to $315,000. Cumulatively in 5 years, it adds up to $500,000
But honestly, Dan, it adds up to more than that, because this also works in your 2.7, which is a difference from the baseline, so.
Plus or minus like a couple hundred.
Yeah.
A couple hundred. And at zero, at zero, you save $200,000, 1 year, but it compounds. So you go from that baseline, $1 million negative on May 31st of 2013 to $380 negative on 2013. So you're still negative. So we still got work to do. The observation would be, though, that if you get that, you may not have to do as much work in terms of the cuts, right?
I mean, in terms of the state aid?
No, in terms of our budget
Making
cuts.
other cuts.
Oh, I see.
Right. I mean, again, if the board's goal is to make sure that we still have, that the district is solvent through 2015, right, then what the staff will do is come back with recommendations based on cuts we need to make, assuming both that we do have flat general state aid or flat state funding, and that we have a loss, an anticipated loss in that funding. And we would make we'd bring all of those forward to you. You can make, your decisions as far as on those recommendations if you want to make those cuts. And if you make those cuts and then we end up miraculously getting a level, funding from the state and federal government, we can at that point in time, bring those other, bring whatever prioritized programs back prior to the beginning of the next school year, so they wouldn't effectively, be a loss. But if that's the board's goal, is to be solvent in 2015, then, assuming you're all happy with the assumptions we've made, I have to go back and work with the staff to make a little over $1 million in cuts for each of the next coming years.
Well, $1 million in cuts in
Yes,
in
that will
10,
compound.
11.
Yes.
That will compound,
Yes.
yes.
Can I ask you to estimate or get back to us at another time about class size assumptions? Could we possibly increase primary grades to 28 and only go up to 30 for the upper grades?
Sure.
And realize any kind of savings that's worthwhile?
30 is the number we used
That's
for
nice
these
and clean.
assumptions.
I get that, but I'm very concerned about
And
that.
the numbers are, there. We save less, if we go to 28 for primary and
Obviously.
30 for,
Obviously, but here's the thing.
but we
I'd
can
like to
do
know
that.
what the difference is between that and some of the things on this list
Oh,
that
sure.
I think I'd rather see go than have, 30 kids in a first grade or kindergarten class.
All right.
So
Now, I will tell you, I
That's the
think that
kind
the
of thing-
savings, if we go to 28 for primary and 30, instead of 3.5, I think we only save 2 FTE. So the saving is about half.
Okay.
All right. But, when we give you our recommendations, we can, show you all of the potential scenarios by just raising the class sizes or by raising the class sizes and going to grade level centers. Obviously, and again, those actual savings are very dependent upon how many students we have, at any given level any year. A couple years ago, going to grade level centers would have saved significantly more staffing than it does now, just based on enrollment pattern. So,
I'm going to do some, at some risk, just a little bit of math on the fly, or ask you to do some math on the fly with me. Go to page 16, or baseline with other state aid at 100%.
less GSA.
Or less GSA, yes. And, just hold that for a second. Then on page 20, we've got the same scenario with $950,000 of cuts. It's, and the thing is if we cut something less than that next year, 600, 700, then the question is simply on page 20, when you look at 2013, that low point balance of $1.2 million, the 300,000 that you don't cut, say, in just round numbers, that would be 300, 600, 900. So you would still be theoretically solvent in 2013 at that level.
By not doing,
By not doing 930, by just doing, say, 630. And Linda, what I'm building to is notions of alternate scenarios.
Right, and I think
Right.
maybe we can, have them run some more
Well-
things once we come back.
Yeah.
I actually think that Steve's recommendation is a good one at this point, to, give some direction on this at this point, and then go back to the staff. Instead of asking them to run numbers right now, or am I off base on
No,
that?
I think what my recommendation would be is if you all, again, want to be solvents in 2015 as opposed to 2013 or, some other year, we'll go back and I'll work with the staff to come up with, some recommendations based on that number. And we'll give you a couple of potential options, one that, saves, continues to keep class size low. And these are the other things we'd have to do to make up that difference. Obviously, there are going to be other programming cuts then to come up to, if elementary class size is the most important thing, then other things will get cut, or as opposed.
Right, and I don't think we know that. I think as a board, we have to decide what we most value, and I think we need to, you know, we need to put this out there about potential
And I will,
changes and see where people weigh in on
Well,
them.
let's
But
talk about timeline then. I mean, in terms of how that unfolds. Let's talk about how it all unfolds, because there's a point, obviously, that we've talked about. We need to engage the community, you know, and solicit their input and their feedback. I think engaging the community doesn't just mean, in my mind, the parents. It engages the larger community, including the teaching staff, and sort of hearing their thoughts.
People who don't have children in the district.
Yeah,
Everybody.
exactly.
And I think, you know, we have to make sure that we make some recommendations that are affecting everybody.
Yeah.
We have to be really sensitive to the you know, to who we are affecting with these recommendations, and not be concerned more with one group or another group. And that is what I would like to see the administration and staff kind of present to us, things that are going to affect elementary, junior high, high school, athletic programs, clubs, you know, all of those things. If we are going to be making cuts that are going to affect people, I think we have to try to be somewhat egalitarian in how we recommend that, so we can get feedback from everybody.
Yeah, I mean, let's play this out, you know, because we have a board meeting on
March 9th, I believe.
9th, and then on March 23rd. And by March 23rd, the district has to decide who to send notices to. As a result of that.
Well, clearly, in a situation where we have absolutely no idea what we're going to get in general state aid.
I understand.
You know, we're in the situation that almost every other district is, in that, unfortunately, and I've never been a fan of this, I've never believed in doing this, of just riffing all the non-tenured teachers. I work very hard not to do that, and to be honest, I still wouldn't recommend that as a blanket statement this year for people we know we need to keep for a variety of reasons. But, you know, there are districts that are clearly just simply riffing everybody who's non-tenured.
Yep.
Our staff isn't big enough for that to be particularly valuable necessarily, depending upon what we're going to cut. But we'll bring forward, you know, a number of recommendations by then. We'll also know, in that situation, who would be potentially cut under any of those circumstances, and we can surely position the district in a situation that ultimately, no matter what set of decisions they make, that they've met all the statutory obligations. All right, and you know, we can do that on March 23rd without worrying about not, you know, meeting our statutory obligations.
What date is that, the date to RIP? Is that
end of March?
60 days?
We have to
before
give
the end of the year?
tenured teachers 60 days before the end of the year, non-tenured staff 45 days.
45, okay.
And generally, historically, we've made all of those, you know, reductions at the same time.
So continue, you know, playing this out again, then, in terms of staff recommendations, I mean, in order for their recommendations to have some value, they clearly need to hear from us, right?
We need to know is how much
Exactly.
you want us to cut.
Well, and you probably want to hear from us, you know, in terms of our own feelings about what's priority, you know, to keep, or what is more tenable to cut as opposed to less tenable to cut, kind of thing. So I'm going to make you know, just if we ask board members, and I don't know that we want to go through the list of potential cuts tonight. I see no's, which I'm glad. We should have a meeting, I would suggest a meeting next week, late next week, you know, Thursday or Friday of next week, where we allow board members to come. We'll post the meeting, open meeting, and we just talk about these cuts amongst us. And it's for all intents and purposes, you know, I could call it a finance committee meeting, but it's not really that. What it is a special board meeting to talk about cuts in an afternoon, right?
After we get the staff recommendations?
Well, as part of the
Saying-
feedback for that.
Oh.
As a big part of the feedback for that.
I am just, yeah, I think
And
that's a
then-
fine idea, but I just wonder if there's going to be a lot that we miss because we won't have those. ideas from the staff.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing is that the question that's put to us is how much money do we want to cut? And I guess personally, I don't know how we can come up with a number until we know what all these things cost, because right now we just have this one piece of paper, and so there's no way of knowing how.
But we know how much we need, how much we are going to be in debt.
Right.
We know
Oh,
we
no.
need to save $1 million.
Right. Oh, I get that. But
So-
what I'm saying is, we can say, obviously, I can't believe anybody would sit here and say we don't want to be solvent in 2013, 2014. But what I'm saying is that I think we need, I totally agree with Dan, we need to get some input from people, ourselves, and the community as to what we value before we go and ask the staff and the administration to start culling that together.
So what
Yeah.
if we play it out this way, where we do effectively a special meeting on budget, just a board meeting on budget next week. We obviously have a board meeting on March 9th to recapitulate sort of where those conversations led the staff. At that point, the staff can sort of summarize those recommendations. And I realize that that's fast and it's a quick turnaround, but you know, I mean, nothing's more pressing in my mind at this moment. So, you know, turn around that staff in the form of 2 or 3 different kinds of recommendations, if you will, for scenarios for budget cuts. Here's what the staff, based on all of our talking, whether it's on Wednesday or Thursday of next week or whatever, or Tuesday next week, I don't care. Put together, look, if based on your conversations and our conversations together, based on the information we had available to us, if we need to cut $950,000 or $1 million, this is where the staff, having heard you, board members, this is what the staff would recommend. If the number is $700,000, this is what the staff would recommend. And effectively just go at it with sort of 2 numbers, you know, a lower number than a full $1 million, because the thing that's at play here is what we just talked about, which is there are some other variables that are going to sort themselves out by the end of this summer.
But I think what Linda said is we already know how much we need them to cut.
Right.
As far as the number goes. And so I think, I tend to agree that we need them to come up with the recommendations, whatever they are, from all aspects, and then we can sit down and have an informed and thorough discussion.
So we can talk about that on March 9th.
So we're going to ask staff.
And effectively schedule a community meeting, next week.
So I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
Are we asking staff then to have their recommendations, or I shouldn't say their recommendations, all their different suggestions to us by then?
Next week? Well, they've clearly already been working on it.
Right.
Yes. So yes is the short
Okay.
answer.
So that we have something to work with?
Yes.
Okay. And we're looking to come up with anywhere from 750, probably thousand to $1 million.
Yes.
Okay.
And are we looking then, if we go with, say, a lower number this year, we're looking at next year, probably
That point-
revisiting?
Well, clearly, this, you know, the cut scenario that's presented includes the notion of class sizes, and we could talk about that either for next year or in conjunction with starting this conversation about should we go to grade level centers? Because, you know, if you're going to go to grade level centers, maybe you don't do anything about class sizes next year. If we're serious about going to grade level centers, we adjust class sizes contemporaneous with the grade level center event. So, yeah, I mean, and that's
I like that.
kind of the thing that is playing out in the back of my mind as well.
Well, and I think we should have that discussion with the members of the community for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I would like to, because this is the first time this is being raised, this level centers, I would really like to see some kind of plan as to what that would look like for the community, because that would be a big change.
And we're not going to unfold that
Right,
like in a
until-
heartbeat here. So I
right,
mean,
no.
that's got to unfold. You know, I mean, that's not a conversation. I don't for 2010.
It's really, really
Right,
important
but-
that we speak about this in general terms about assumptions. What if this, then this? I mean, I do not want the community to, hear about this evening and start talking about how we've decided to go to grade level centers.
Yeah.
In fact, one thing I'd like to happen in the morning messages is to have everybody know that this conversation took place at the board meeting tonight through the email, so that people know that the conversation has happened. And again, I've said this before in the Finance Committee, I really want to be organized and thorough when we present something to the community about what we have been thinking about. The idea of having just this open forum at this point sounds extremely chaotic to me. And I think we have to be very careful about that.
Many other districts are doing that, as, I don't know, maybe difficult as it is to hear from the communities. But I mean, everywhere you look, it's happening, and it's
Right.
just.
But it would be nice if we had answers to their questions when they asked us questions.
We definitely need to be
Preparation.
prepared. Yeah.
That's what I'm talking
Having
about.
said that, the other word that Dr. Ball touched on earlier tonight that I'm going to raise as well in terms of a scenario is referendum. And the question becomes, what would that look like? And how does that play out? I don't think it clearly isn't going to be realistic to think about that solving next year's problems or the year after that, because even if you can get one done, which is at best a Herculean task,
The chances
it's not.
of it
The money's not going to start. We're not going to start to see the money until sort of 2013, right?
Well, you have to have an
Pass on the
enormous
first
time. Get
community
past it,
effort
yes.
behind.
Okay.
So,
Dan, you have
but
to have an enormous community effort behind a referendum if it's going to
But
be
I think
successful.
now is the time to open the conversation, right? And say, look, these are the program cuts, or these are the cuts, and let's make, let's not, like, sugarcoat it. There's one long page of a spreadsheet cuts, and there's precious little that doesn't result in somebody losing a job, or a child who doesn't get to do something by way of an activity. Whatever comes out of budget cuts is going to touch programs or people. It's just a question of which ones, and how badly and how deeply and all that stuff.
Well, again, just
so having said
for
that,
clarification on that.
if we want to raise the question, right?
Sure.
If I want to preserve all of those, how much money do I need
Then there's
to
some other.
preserve that? And what is that referendum? What does it look like?
Well, and, I had a teacher ask me a couple of days ago that, can't we just cut supplies? If we basically cut everything so that there was no paper for the copy machines next year.
No ink, no.
No ink, no paper, no color cartridges for the printers in the computer lab, nothing, no paper towels, no toilet paper, no tissues, we would save about $500,000. That's half of what we need to save. So, as Dan articulated, there is no way to make these cuts that are not going to have a direct impact on student programming at some level. The question becomes, what student programming do you wish to protect, and which student programming are you willing to have cut?
And I think that's the board conversation that we need to have next week.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess I'll add to something that Linda, you said that, a referendum question does include great community input, and I think until we reach out to that community and ask them, right now, we're looking at $1 million of cuts. Until we ask the community what they see as the priorities, I wouldn't even think about going to ask anybody for any more money until we've done the work and we've really, had numerous meetings like Dan's talking about to look at all this. I guess I'm a little confused at the going to the staff and asking them for $1 million when we as a board haven't discussed what we find as important for our district and we haven't heard from our constituents. I agree with Dan. This isn't going to be fun in any way. It's going to affect people, but I think we need to listen to our community and find out what they find is important.
Well, I think we're going to do that at the same time.
Yeah.
I think it's a timing issue. We kind of need to get the information from our staff at the same time that we're going to be getting information from the community.
But it's all, the time is so late.
If I may make a recommendation, what I would suggest is if the board is comfortable with the concept of we'd like to be solvent in 2015, right? We'll go back, and Maureen and I'll work with the staff to make cuts based on that, all right? And then we'll do that in such a way that we'll put a couple scenarios together. One, for instance, that protects our extracurricular activities primarily. One that protects elementary class size, as key components, and look at a couple of different ways to make those cuts. There are a few things that in any scenario are going to be cut, right? But in most cases, we either make larger cuts in one area or another, and again, the community then can respond to those, the board can respond to those different options, and then look at what you want to do based on those general areas. Because I think to go through a laundry list of cuts that are in some cases a couple of $1,000s a piece is not going to solve the problem. And we'll do that. We'll bring those back. My suggestion would be we'll bring those back to you for the board meeting on March 9th. You can put that information out for the public at the same time, and then
But that doesn't allow us input to those recommendations, right? And that's what I'm seeking.
But I think
it's as a board, right?
Sure.
As a board.
But I don't necessarily know if
we
you have
ought to
the
know
time
as a
to do
board how we feel about some of the suggestions,
But
and work it out.
It's the same as any recommendation that comes
Yeah.
from the administration. We make the recommendation, you all discuss it, you can adjust it, you can amend it, you can.
I know, understood, but I mean, at a regular board meeting, I mean, I'd rather set aside a time for us to actually work that out, because this is much bigger than anything we've done in the last 25 years.
I understand
It's
that, but I
just
guess
much too
the
big.
point is if the staff doesn't work until after we get until we hear from the board, we're going to run out of time
Yeah,
before March
it's
23rd.
kind of a circular thing here. We have
Yeah,
to
but
start.
you've already mentioned that that March 23rd. So
What if we
all
met
I'm
after
saying
the
is
March 9th meeting,
I'd
Dan?
like to have
Could we do that?
I'd like to just plan the next two steps. The first step being, I'd like us as a board to work out our own priorities as a board. The second step being to package that up, based on your recommendations as well, but to package that up into something that the board feels comfortable with. Okay, having seen staff recommendations, having talked about staff recommendations amongst us,
Right.
here's the things that we expect to go out to the community.
That's what I'm
Right.
just saying.
So
but
how about
So how
after
did
the
the
March
dates work?
9th
we need
meeting,
the time
we have
to
a meeting?
do that. The staff needs the time to put those recommendations together in a coherent way. And March 9th is
So-
the first reasonable expectation for the staff to do that.
So between our next
Okay.
two board meetings, is
That would be a good idea.
It just means that we're not, it just
Yeah.
means that we're gonna have, so we're gonna talk about our feelings about that stuff at a March 9th board meeting.
We can have another meeting,
No, we
like
can
Linda
have your
suggested.
meeting after we get the information
Okay.
on the March 9th, at the
Before
March
the
9th meeting.
23rd.
And then
Before
you
the
can have,
23rd.
again, you can have another board meeting, or again, you could,
Okay.
do it in April.
And then,
the
but at
longer
what
it
point
takes
then
you,
what point do we engage the community then?
Well, I was just going to ask that, because
anytime
I
after
like.
March 9th,
Yeah, or
but
after that meeting we have in between the 9th and
Sure.
the 23rd.
And that is the
Okay.
timeline we discussed in the finance committee
Right.
meeting, was March 9th, and then the week after
Yes.
doing the community engagement.
Okay.
Okay.
And the other issue is the longer you wait, the better chance you have of any real information from Springfield.
Well, March 9th is fine. Let's take that step. Let's do that second step then, and then we'll go from there.
So if we're gonna be reaching out to the community, do we want to go ahead and set something up for that so we can start marketing that and letting people know that we're going to do this?
Well,
Because,
we're on TV presently talking about it.
no,
so-
I mean a date. I hear you, Dan, because I'm right with you.
If you want to do a
Having said-
date between March 9th and March 23rd, I'm
Yeah,
going to suggest
what
March
we-
16th.
March 16th, that's where I was going to go with, yeah.
Are we
I mean-
going to be organized and prepared for March 16th?
See, no, my
Well-
suggestion is that's when we
Negotiations.
meet as
Is
a
that
board, to have our special meeting that Dan was
That
recommending.
week.
The 16th.
On the 16th?
So realistically, something with the community the week of or after the 23rd.
Okay.
That's spring break, so that doesn't work.
After March
After.
23rd?
So it would be the first week
That's
of, it would be the first full week or
Do
second
something the
of
first full week of
April.
April.
Now, having said that then, so we will have had to make, I mean, you'll make staffing decisions for notification purposes. You'll make RIF decisions.
Yes.
It'll unfortunately be,
It'll be a worst-case
It'll be a
scenario.
worst-case scenario. So we have an engagement in the first part of April. I think as a board then, we have to revisit those engagements over the period of the next, month. And we may want to have, based on that, a second engagement. But we can play that out at that point, I suppose. It just means that we won't have final budget cuts, really, that we've done until May.
Well, you're not going to have final budget cuts until September. I mean, normally we don't.
No, I know,
approve the budget
final
till
budget's not, but I mean, we'll work out the cut piece in May.
But again,
What
the
do we have
longer
on
you wait.
do we have a large agenda for the 23rd? Can we not?
I don't know.
Can we not have a community forum discussion on the 23rd?
As part of the regular board
Yeah.
meeting? I don't know.
You could.
How big is the agenda for the 23rd? I don't know.
Maybe if it's not too large, we can have one of, part of the meeting dedicated to that on the 23rd.
Judy?
Dr. Rossetti is supposed to come to the March 23rd board meeting.
Well, it would be good for her to be there for that. So that won't take long. I mean,
Okay,
that's a-
at this meeting, would we have things prepared and so that we could, and at this March 23rd meeting, intelligently answer these questions? Because, like what Linda's saying too, I would
hope
love
so.
to have some sort, well,
Absolutely.
that's
Otherwise,
why
I'm
I'm.
not
The
showing
public,
up.
the public meeting also has to have a component of education to it, where again, we
Right.
just, like we did tonight, that we take something of a slow walk for a half hour through the budget as it exists, so that we understand it.
An hour and a half, Dan.
Can I just
Well-
add one thing? Is there any plans, or should there be plans, to at least get some feedback from the students, especially at the high school level, on this issue? I mean, should they be polled as to if something has to be cut, what should it be? If it's an extracurricular or...
Well, of course, they're all going to say they don't want anything cut.
But these are hard decisions. It's a good learning lesson for them,
I think what we have
in
to
life.
possibly throw out there is, paying to participate to some degree.
Yeah.
Participation fees in lieu of getting rid of a program.
Yeah,
But
there's
still-
That might be one thing we have to throw out there. And I think, and again, as I was saying earlier, we really have to look at the entire community and how it's gonna affect everybody, and be very careful that we are seeing the whole picture and not, leaving anybody out or focusing on one area or another. I mean, I think those are the kinds of things I'm hoping the staff will come back to us. Like, how much money would we make if everybody had to pay to play a sport, for example? That kind of thing, to afford the stipends, for example, that pay for the staff, or whatever it takes, So,
It still would be interesting to see from the students' perspective what they value the most as well. I mean, we can sit around and talk,
A lot of time.
I'm sorry?
Sounds like a lot of time that will be invested.
well, we could,
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and
yeah.
then will you offend other students at the junior high and grade school for not extending the invitation to them as well?
Well,
I'm
Joel,
just
I think
saying-
I think it's a good idea. I think for right now, though, let's focus on the adults, if we could. But I think that's a good idea. I feel like we have a time crunch, though, and if we want to develop an
well, by
authentic
the
survey.
23rd, by the 23rd of March, it's a month. I mean,
Okay.
Well,
We could ask the staff.
that brings up a good question, though. I'm glad that you brought that up, Linda, for two things. One, the suggested cuts in front of us don't really go across the district. They really seem to focus on some schools more than others. So I would love to see something from the staff that really does, if
Well,
we're
that's
all
because-
gonna bleed, we all
Well,
gotta
the thing
bleed.
is, there are many more things going on at the high school.
Oh, I know, but I'm
Just to
just,
articulate that list of cuts, last board meeting, you got the letter that I sent to all staff members asking for their suggestions. And I also shared it with the joint PTO and then with the board. Those are all of the suggestions I got from any source. Everything that's there is listed.
Well,
As
then
I said,
maybe the elementary schools and the junior high need to think a little harder,
Well,
since the high school
so-
seems to be getting so hit.
the staff will now, I'll go back and work with the staff, and we'll come up with recommendations that meet those numbers.
Okay.
Because if those are the numbers that we want to get to, we'll come back with a set of recommendations that we feel are balanced and equitable based on a range of priorities.
And it's hard to just look for equitable flat dollar amount cuts because the high school is where we spend the majority of our money. So I would anticipate seeing most of the cuts at the high school.
And you're not going to see many cuts at Miller because there just are very few extra programs.
There's not a lot of clubs at Miller. There's not a lot of clubs at Manning. So that's where the majority of our expenses lie.
Yeah.
Well, but I think one thing that Joel brings up, I think, is a good point. One of the things that we talked about a few months ago here was adding courses that weren't there before. So we have now added some courses to the menu, if you will. So in essence, we're actually seeking the input of the students in terms of selecting courses. But I think to some degree, if the high school is where we spend most of the energy in that, we should maybe something. I mean, I think we should look for something.
The courses are recommended by the staff, not the students. And they're in the handbook as offerings. If there isn't adequate enrollment, they won't fly. So I think that maybe is a different.
Well, but we added to our offerings based on staff. So what I'm saying now is that
it equates to a dollar amount that is going to make a difference in the budget. Is all I'm saying.
Right, because if, like she said, if we have a certain threshold.
Oh, I totally understand that.
And
I'm
we
just
didn't
saying
hire
maybe
new
there's
staff for that or anything like that. So, do you know what I'm saying?
Right, but someone's got to staff it.
So we'll have staff recommendations on the 9th.
Right.
We'll have a follow-up to, we'll have a follow-up to that
Not
on.
additional. No.
Okay.
On the 23rd, potentially.
Okay.
Well, we may have a follow-up either before or during the 23rd, because the 23rd we may want to have as a more open session, is what I'm hearing. But if we do that, we probably want to have an interim meeting where we get organized.
Right. I thought we decided that
On the
these
16th?
On the
16th. Okay.
Let me
Good
make
enough.
just one other general comment.
provided that it works
Is
for everybody.
people have asked some things about some of these cuts, whereas if we cut a position, for instance, the person is going to, other people are going to just assume those duties. One of the reasons for sharing with you the cuts made in 1985 and 86 is that, there is, in a lot of cases in this district, very skeletal staff as we speak. And so, for instance, one of the suggestions is to cut an administrator at the high school. If you cut that administrator at the high school, 2 administrators can't do the job 3 people are doing now because, with the exception of Mr. Carr, who's out in the room out there, the other 2 are generally at the high school from 6 in the morning most days till 10 at night. Things are going to not be done.
Right.
And so I just think it's important to realize that, where our staffs are. For instance, you heard from the library staff, and they've made a lot of progress over the last couple of years, that if we cut librarians, one of the things on the list, there's technology support that's not going to be there. There's classroom support that's not going to be there. And not that those cuts can't be made. In any case, they can be made. But we're not in a situation where the workload from our staff is such that, people are going to be able to just pick up the pieces. There are things that are not going to be done.
I think that's really
Specifically with our custodial staff. Cuts custodial staff. Our custodial staff was cut in 1986, when I look, and has never been brought back to the pre-1985 levels. And our buildings are now approaching 100 years old in a couple of cases. So just be aware that many of our systems already are very minimal, and it can be the case that, we don't want to make changes to classroom size at the elementary. I would be very supportive of that. However, many other things have to give in the way to do that. Right. And so as we bring things forward, if things get cut, those things, no one in most cases is going to be able to just pick up that slack. The staffing that exists in this district just doesn't allow for that.
It's pretty bare bones, I would say.
Well,
with a few exceptions.
The unfortunate reality is the alternative to some administrative cuts is to cut things in the classroom.
I'm not saying not to do that. I'm just saying that to say, okay, other people are going to pick that up.
I get it.
It doesn't happen that way.
Well, and I guess the thing is, to the extent if you look at this as a business, almost every business out there is doing the same thing. They're making cuts, and somebody has to pick that up. So I'm not, I understand what you're saying, but every every organization, every company, everybody is looking to do that, and when they downsize, that doesn't mean like this part of the car doesn't get done.
Sure,
It means that somebody picks that up.
But as they downsize, they're downsizing because they have fewer customers. We're not going to have fewer customers.
No,
That's the
no.
difference.
And imagine one elementary school principal for two
Right.
buildings.
I mean, one of the suggestions is eliminate, combine the elementary principals into one position. Again, I personally believe that's fairly unrealistic.
Well, I just want to thank you for coming in, Mike, to do
yeah, Mike, are you still awake, Mike?
to do the presentation to us. It was very,
Did you find any
very
money while you were sitting there, Mike?
Unfortunately, no.
Anything you want to add? You can say no.
You can say
No.
Just being polite.
Went on long enough.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Before we, next item, public comment. Does anybody have any public comments?
Hello, my name is Jonathan McKay. And to switch gears just a bit to the MAP scores, the second round of MAP scores have come in, the winter scores. And when the fall scores came in, I stood at this same podium, but at the high school, and asked questions, what about the impact, especially of math, which would have been 2 years in, that we were getting folks shifted to doing algebra. In fact, at a board meeting this fall, there was talked about that, 75% or so of the 8th graders the last year had gone through algebra. And so you'd expect that scores would be going up. Now, MAP tests are based on a scaled score. So every year, you should be scoring more and more total points from first grade all the way up to when they finish up. And over half the states in the union use MAP scores. MAP testing is the basis for RTI testing in Illinois. So these are standards across the majority of schools that do RTI. Dr. Ball,
I don't
do
think
they
you
use
can
MAP?
say that. I don't think that's accurate.
What is the other testing vehicle they do for the majority?
They can use a variety of measures. To just say blanketly that RTI and
When I was at the
MAP.
Regional Office of Education, there were two choices, and MAP was one of them. And the feeling I got was that was the one that was used by the majority of schools districts. Is that incorrect?
I don't necessarily know if I would say that that's the only
There were two choices.
taste. There are many more than two choices, but go ahead.
It's a standard across numerous states. And so now we're looking at something not Illinois, but validated across a number of states. And so now I look at the winter numbers, and I'll ask the same question I asked in fall. If I look at, and scale scores mean you're learning more. Obviously, you make bigger jumps in lower grades and smaller jumps at higher grades, but you still should be overall increasing. If we look at median scores, meaning as many score above and below as this number, in math, in 8th grade, the winter median score was 237. In 9th grade, the winter median score was 238. So one whole year, one whopping point in the scale score for median. And in 10th grade, it was back to 237. So our median math score in MAP, which we use as a basis for RTI, which is scaled, is exactly the same for our 8th graders and our 9th graders for the winter median. In fall, for 9th grade and 10th grade, they were both at 237. So it hadn't changed. And so if we look at the impact of our 8th graders increasingly taking algebra, which is supposed to impact what's going on in higher level grades, something is going on that I look at just the MAP scores, which are scaled, there's no change. So are things not being learned? If I look at reading scores, we get the same kind of thing. Now, if you take a different spin and you look at national percentile rank in reading, District 201, we're in the 57th percentile, 58th, 55th, 61st, 58th, 60th, and then we get to 8th grade in reading. We go from 60 to 56. The next year we go from 56 to 49. The next year from 49 to 48. So our standing in terms of how our 8th graders, 9th graders, and 10th graders rank amongst their national peers is declining. If we look at math, we stay, for the elementary school years, we stay at 62%, 66, 62, 79, 56, 59, and then we hit 8th, 9th, and 10th. We go from 59 down to 55, down to 50, down to 47, which means we're in the lower half then. I'd just like to know what is going on. When I asked this in fall, I was told something that math scores don't count because it changes something. They don't test algebra. What does this mean? We didn't talk about it today, but clearly things aren't budging in terms of what our kids are supposed to be increasing, and that's what MAP is supposed to be testing. I know that Ms. Civic is in the back, Dr. Ball. I'll take answers from either person.
Maybe we could schedule this for another meeting?
Sure.
If we can do that, because this is really public comments, and
that's fine.
We're bound by that.
That's fine. I hope somebody's concerned. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up on that, if you don't mind. I just want clarification of the MAP score. Is this not strictly about individual test scores? I mean, is there a norm really that we're following with this, or is it based strictly on individuals?
It's a nationally normed test. The key is to look for individual growth for each of our students.
Yeah, but they're aggregated too, and so let's not dismiss aggregate measures entirely, because aggregation matters. It speaks to curriculum as a whole.
The key point is the use of MAP, particularly, is to show, what students are making growth. And if you take a look, one of the things that is in Christie's report is that, with the exception of the 8th graders, our students are making expected growth from that same group of kids last year, and so. To compare, the means, particularly between two different groups of kids, doesn't necessarily mean as much as if you were taking that same group of kids and seeing if there was growth over, from 8th grade to freshman year to sophomore year, for instance.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, I hope?
Well, so your point is to look at a longitudinal, look at those numbers longitudinally, yes?
Yes.
Aggregated and longitudinally.
Yes.
Have we done that? Can we do that, just out of curiosity?
And let's remember that this is supposed to be informing teachers and how they alter their curriculum for individual students. And so, Mr. McKay, I don't know if, we're not privileged to student records, but I would, for my own child, I would be looking to see if he or she was making progress every time they took a MAP test.
The meeting of an entire grade doesn't budge from one year to another.
It's a different class, right? Are you comparing 8th graders one year with?
Are you saying there's progressively dumber classes coming along?
No, I'm asking if you're comparing 8th graders to 8th graders year after year, or to their class as it progresses on.
In fall, I asked those questions, and I was given an answer that didn't seem to make sense, and now this is another perspective.
No, she's asking you a question.
It's okay, we'll get back to you.
But it was my understanding as well that MAP tests are supposed to be more used to see the individual growth of a student.
And collectively, they do have meaning.
No, we're talking about individual assessment. That is really the main reason for MAP testing.
Well, in our book, it talks here about
question.
national percentile rank, so there's got to be some reason that that's there too. So,
Right, because when you get your own kid's score, you get all that
You get
information on the readout, and that's pertinent.
And you
for
want to see, and you want to see how your individual student.
I think what we're just saying, Mr. McKay, is that, this is not the best test to measure growth of a class from one year to another, but we can certainly have somebody respond to your questions.
Even this report, to Christie's credit and the work that was behind it, and thank you for that, but this report clearly is an aggregate, an aggregation. It's not, the scores on here are not one child.
Right. How else can she report to us, though?
Exactly, but the point being, it has meaning to do it that way. It has meaning. And I think, that meaning is worth exploring. There's no harm in exploring that meaning.
How teachers do use the test is they look at the individual student scores because it is an adaptive test. You see the prerequisites of individual students.
according to national norms, we are declining in how we stack up against the nation. If I went to talk at bare minimums and at poverty kids, that's a whole different kind of thing. If I just look at peers across the nation doing math testing, we drop in terms of our rankings from 60 percentiles and 55th percentiles down to the 45s as you go from 8th, 9th, and 10th grade across the nation compared to all the other folks. We're doing something anti that the rest of the nation collectively is doing. That should be a concern.
Okay, any other public comments? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining, pending litigation, and personnel issues.
So moved.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Kelly?
Yes.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes. And there will not be a vote.